Chapter 61. Boom! It exploded with an unfathomable force, carrying a destructive wave of energy that spread across the surroundings. The entire vicinity was blasted into smithereens, including the glass walls. They were supposed to repair themselves whenever they were damaged, but they were blasted to pieces before the energy even made contact. The energy raged across the vicinity for a few more seconds before the place became calm again. The small mist slowly began to dissipate. But even with everywhere becoming calm, the environment was riddled with destruction. Everything was in shambles. Pieces of equipment blasted to pieces, same with the scientific AIs. The mecha cannon that fired the energy had melted to the point that only half of the legs were left. The upper part, where the cannon was joined to, was nowhere to be found. As the mist dispersed completely, corpses with incomplete body parts could be seen scattered across the place. Limbs missing body parts sprawled across the place. Black blood splattered across the walls. It was obvious that the blood was burnt due to the immense radiation from the energy blast. The roof was almost blasted open completely. Surprisingly, a man in a blue suit stood opposite where the blast occurred. Not a single bloodstain or speck of dirt could be seen on his suit. He was as neat as ever, his looks contrasting with that of the environment. This was none other than Young, and his face was still laced with coldness and aloofness even after seeing the destruction around him. It still didn't crack, eh? Young stared at the green rock positioned in place. Just like him, the rock didn't have a single scratch on it after the immense explosion. "Jack, we're going to have to move to the next facility," Young stated as he turned around. The scientist wearing spectacles was right behind him. He also didn't have a single scratch on his body. "All right, Sir Young," he answered with a sigh after looking around. Not a single scientist survived. They were all torn apart by the energy. What a waste of good brains, he sighed internally again. Swoosh! All of a sudden, a dark silhouette streaked towards them from the other end of the room and arrived before Young. The man that appeared before them had a buff build and a half-green mask covering his face. Master Young, I've found his whereabouts," the man spoke. Young's expression slightly changed when he heard that. "You know what to do. It must be done immediately before that woman is alerted," Young replied with a cautious look. The man nodded and turned around to leave. "Eden!" Before he could leave, Young called out to him. "If that woman catches you, you'll die," Young stated with a heavy expression. "Be as quick as possible if you want to survive, because even I cannot save you if she's involved. And besides, if you fail, you don't need to be alive. You're better off dead," Young said while walking forward. Even with the mask on his face, it was obvious that Young's words had struck fear into his heart. He nodded and streaked out of the room, leaving behind shadowy after images. "Jack, get the rock, we're leaving," Young commanded as he walked forward. Gustav was currently standing behind one of the last buildings that led to the forest region. He stared at the wall behind the building with a smile hung on his face. "You've kept me waiting for too long." "Finally," Gustav muttered with a look of excitement. A black figure that looked like a serpent was crawling on the wall. The difference between this and a normal serpent was the size and some other body differences. The length was about 7 meters and its width was comparable to 20 able-bodied men joined together. Its head had a red line cut across it, and its tail was like that of a scorpion's. The tip of its tail was extremely pointed and dark purple. A level 3 Savarinius serpent mixed breed. Defensive scales that can bounce off the 90% of physical force thrown at it, and it also has a deadly venom in its tail. Gustav analyzed the mixed breed. He had researched about mixed breeds enough to recognize this one at first glance. The mixed breed who noticed Gustav right from the time he appeared here finally leaped out. "Tum!" Gustav was still on the ground, so the serpent was practically leaping downwards. The speed of the serpentine mixed breed was fast enough to make it cross over 70 feet in a single second. Gustav activated dash and ran towards the left. Swoosh! While dodging the body of the serpentine mixed breed, he transformed into the mutated bull. SHHSSSHH. After sliding forward for a bit, the serpentine mixed breed paused and twisted its neck area towards the side to stare at Gustav. It was staring at Gustav, wondering why he was no longer looking human. Gustav didn't give it the chance to think for too long before dashing forward again. His speed was still greater than that of the serpentine mixed breed, and he arrived in front of it while swinging his fist towards its head. Shwai! The serpentine mixed breed threw its tail forward towards Gustav in response. Gustav noticed the tail coming and swerved towards the left to dodge while still moving forward. He arrived at the left side of the snake and threw his fist towards its neck area. Bang! Gustav's fist landed on its body, but he was the one who was thrown backward. Ugh! Gustav exclaimed in pain as his body was blasted several feet backward. Looks like I didn't research properly. 90% of the force is actually redirected towards the attacker. Gustav figured this out after receiving the full brunt of his own attack. The pain was still coursing through his body as he wondered how his punch was so painful. The serpentine mixed breed didn't wait for Gustav to stabilize himself before swinging out its tail again towards him. The speed of the tail happened to be faster than the serpentine's body movement as a whole. Gustav's body was still moving backward from the force of the first attack. Before he could stabilize himself, the tail was already a few inches from making contact with his face. Swoosh! Using his quick reflexes, Gustav grabbed onto the tail from both sides and used it to push himself backward. SHHHSSHH. His feet slid across the ground as the tail pushed him backward. Venom have permeated host system. Toxin immunity has been activated. Gustav saw the notification appear in his line of sight just as he let go of the serpentine mixed breed tail. Looks like even touching its tail is dangerous. But not for me. Gustav secretly thanked his stars for the toxin immunity. The serpentine mixed breed thrust its tail forward again, trying to pierce Gustav, but this time Gustav jumped backward, dodging its range of extension. SSHHHSSS. He slid backward by few feet after landing. He had distanced himself from the mixed breed by about 600 feet now, which bought him about 2 seconds to think. Normal physical attack will be useless, so I have to mix it with that. 0 seconds. Immediately after dash ended, Gustav activated sprint and ran dash towards the serpentine mixed breed again. The mixed breed, who was wondering why the human didn't die from touching its tail, swung out its tail again. The tail was sweeping towards Gustav from the left. Tum! Gustav jumped high up and landed on the large tail. Atomic disintegration. Gustav's hand was coated in a white glow as he ran across the body of the serpentine mixed breed. Chapter 62. Gustav ran across the body of the serpentine mixed breed with hands coated in white light. The serpentine mixed breed swung its tail upwards, trying to throw Gustav off balance. Instead of losing his balance, Gustav used the force to propel himself forward. He leaped more than 5 meters across the air. His body descended with his glowing white fist outstretched. Bang! Gustav's fist landed on the head of the serpentine mixed breed. The large creature's head shook slightly. Unlike before, Gustav was only thrown back a little by the force because the white light annihilated most of the force that was supposed to be sent back to him. Gustav landed back on his feet after making a low grunt. The atomic disintegration was only powerful enough to disintegrate part of the force, which meant he would still receive damage from any successful attack against the serpentine mixed blood. The serpentine mixed breed only received 10% damage. In fact, it hardly received any damage at all because apart from sending back physical force, it still had hard scales that would protect it normally. Gustav dashed towards the side again and punched towards the left eye of the serpentine mixed breed. Gustav was almost twice as fast as the creature, so it didn't notice the fist until it was about 10 inches away from its eyes. The serpentine mixed breed opened its mouth wide. As Gustav's fist was about to make contact with its eyes, he suddenly felt danger. Tum! He immediately leaped upwards as a pillar of purplish light shot out of the serpentine mixed breed's mouth. It missed Gustav's feet by an inch. The creature didn't wait for Gustav to descend from the air before raising its head to face upwards and fired the beam again. Gustav looked down while being in midair and noticed the beam headed for him. He twisted his body towards the left, dodging the beam as he controlled his body to descend faster. The beam passed by his side, but the intense amount of heat it carried slightly burned a hole in his cloth around Gustav's left rib area. The creature noticed it missed Gustav and shot out the beam again severely. Thwai! 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 It looked as if Gustav could fly with the way he kept twisting his body in midair to dodge the beams as he descended. He dodged every single one of them. Sprint has been deactivated. Dash has been activated. Blam! He landed on the ground and dashed towards the left again, dodging the purplish beam. Although his speed wasn't as great as before when using dash, it was still a bit faster than the attacks of the serpentine mixed breed. Thwai! Thwai! Swai! Swai! It shot out beams while also sending its tail towards Gustav. Gustav was able to dodge every single beam and its tail sweep, but he couldn't find a way to attack the creature. He could only attack its body if the tail swept towards him, but it was useless since 90% of the attack would be redirected back towards him. From Gustav's observation, the places that could be attacked on the creature's body were its eyes, but Gustav couldn't get close to its face. Gustav thought about the best way to deal with the creature without having to harm himself, while dodging the attacks. After dodging for a few more seconds, his eyes widened as he realized something. Don't I just need to penetrate it? Immediately this thought came to his mind. Gustav turned around and distanced himself from the creature. Dash has been deactivated. Gustav was now more than 500 feet away from the creature. His body reduced in size as he transformed back into human form. The serpentine mixed breed slithered towards him violently. Mutated Bloodwolf transformation has been activated. Gustav's body transformed rapidly. Brown furs grew out of his body as his eyes turned dark red, glowing with viciousness. He grew to over 2 meters tall with a robust figure similar to that of a bear. 4 sharp claws about 9 inches long protruded from both of his paws. Grrrhhhhhhrr. Gustav didn't know where it was coming from, but he suddenly felt the will to shred the serpentine mixed breed to pieces. His eyes were fierce, and he felt a wave of bloodlust trying to take over his sense of reasoning. This time his sweatshirt couldn't take his buff build and started tearing apart. Only his pants were left in a better state. The serpentine creature headed for him earlier paused and stared at him for a while. It was just like when Gustav was transformed into the mutated bull when fighting the Bloodwolf. The serpentine mixed breed also had a look of confusion, wondering why the human would be able to transform not just once but twice. Gustav calmed his raging bloodlust as he recalled what needed to be done. Grrrhhhhhhrr. He raised his right paw before dashing out. His speed was still generally the same when using bull transformation, but he was more flexible in this state. Dash has been activated. Gustav activated dash again, boosting his current speed by a lot. Thwai! 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 The serpentine mixed breed started shooting out those purplish beams again. The danger he felt from it was just as much as before, so he still dodged. He was already running out of energy after activating dash and sprint severally, so he quickly headed for the body of the snake since he couldn't move towards its head. Shwai! The serpentine mixed breed swung its tail out towards Gustav again. This time Gustav didn't even try to dodge the long tail headed for him. Atomic disintegration has been activated. Gustav raised his right paw up as the tail headed for him. His 4 claws were coated in whitish light. He gathered power into his right arm before swinging it down, towards the incoming tail. The intensity at which his claws descended upon the tail of the serpentine mixed breed causing a ripping sound to echo across the place. Shinin! His claws made contact with the tail and smoothly severed it from the body of the serpentine mixed breed. Bam! The tail fell to the ground and dark purplish blood jetted out it. Shokiki-hiss! The serpentine mixed breed made a loud and painful noise that was similar to both hissing and screeching. Host has learned the skill. Gustav noticed the notification, but he didn't focus on it. While the serpentine mixed breed was thrashing around in pain, Gustav dashed towards it again. It noticed Gustav and shot out another beam, but now it was slower than before, which gave him the chance to dodge easily while closing in on it. Swoosh! Gustav arrived before the huge face of the serpentine mixed breed, whose mouth was still wide open. Before it could shoot out another beam, Gustav's claws were already swinging upwards towards its face from below. Slash has been activated. Chapter 63. Slash has been activated. Gustav's claws tore 4 deep gashes across the jaw area of the serpentine mixed breed, causing its head to tilt upwards as it screeched in pain. Blood kept jetting out, but Gustav didn't stop there, as his left arm was already swinging from the side with a follow-up attack. Slash! 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 Gustav's claws furiously slashed across the neck and face of the serpentine mixed breed. Dark purplish blood splattered across the place as he kept slashing non-stop. Cuts that were deeper than 30 inches could be seen all over its upper body. Claws marked that made the internal part of its head visible. Gustav suddenly jumped up while raising both arms before swinging them down with full force. His claws from both paws formed a white visible arc of light as it came down upon the head of the serpentine mixed breed. Slash! The head of the serpentine mixed breed was cleanly severed in two. Plop! Half of its head fell to the ground as purplish blood jetted out from its incomplete head like a fountain. Gustav's body was already bathed in purplish blood, but he wasn't bothered. Grrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr lifted it by the neck and brought it towards his face before taking a bite. Crunch! Gustav bit the rest of its head off, causing more showers of blood. You killed a Saverenia serpent mixed breed, 7000 EXP. The notification brought him back to reality, as he stopped himself before taking another bite of the Saverenia serpent mixed breed. Another beast transformation bloodline found. Does host wish to add Saverenia serpent transformation to beast transformation bloodline? Yes/no. Gustav stared at the notification for many seconds while still holding onto the neck of the serpentine mixed breed. He could taste the blood of the creature in his mouth, and surprisingly it tasted good. He already guessed that this was because of the bloodwolf transformation. He felt disgusted by the fact that he would look like that if he transformed to the Saverenia serpent mixed breed, but upon thinking about it for a few more seconds he concluded. Its scales are capable of reflecting and sending back 90% of any physical attacks. It can shoot out a deathly toxic beam from its mouth. Its only flaw is its appearance, Gustav analyzed. He was only able to cut the scales open with the power of the blood wolf and atomic disintegration combined. It didn't work for the bull transformation because he was using fists. The compounded force was easier to bounce off even when he coupled it with atomic disintegration, while for the blood wolf, his claws were able to cut fast and deep enough with the help of atomic disintegration to penetrate the scales. The scales were responsible for bouncing off physical attacks, but when it was cut through, its ability to perform that function was discarded. Gustav had already analyzed all these after his first exchange with the serpentine mixed breed. No matter how disgusting, power is still power, Gustav concluded. He never knew when such power would come in handy, so decided to go accept it. Yes, Gustav called out in his mind. Extracting Saverenia serpent, extraction process, 1%. Around midnight Gustav got back to his apartment. He immediately went to the washroom to take a bath after removing his pants. SSHHHSSS? SSHHHSSS? The sound of dripping water could be heard inside the bathroom. Gustav stood underneath the shower as he analyzed the previous battle. The water falling on his head gave him a cool and refreshing feeling, which made him take note of some things that he didn't think of earlier. To think it would still take me that long to defeat a level 3 mixed breed even after I have increased in strength, Gustav said internally. Now he understood that not everything was all about being high level, because originally he should be able to defeat this mixed breed with ease, yet it took him time, and he would have even been defeated if he didn't know what to do. He now understood that different kinds of bloodlines' abilities could really give boons to the owner. A level 4 mixed breed might not be able to defeat the Saverenia serpent mixed breed due to its attributes. He had decided not to be careless when facing any creature with a bloodline, because there were a lot of bloodlines out there. There might be some that gave the owner ridiculous boons which could help them in defeating creatures higher rank than them. Gustav finished taking his bath and went back to the living room. He moved towards his reading chair after putting on pajamas. My web board is about 3 inches away from where it used to be. Gustav stared at the circular web board on his reading table with a contemplative look. I'm pretty sure it was 3 inches towards the left before. Gustav was able to notice this minor detail. He suddenly became cautious and started checking around his apartment. He checked every part of his room, bathroom, toilet, kitchen, etc. After checking everywhere and seeing nothing else looking suspicious, Gustav moved back to his living room. Maybe I'm just imagining it. Gustav held his chin as his suspicion eased up a bit. The security measures of this area is pretty bad, so maybe I should put personal security measures in place. The next day Gustav woke up by his usual time. He finished preparing and headed for school with Angie. Of course, Angie kept questioning him about the night before and whether he even left his apartment. She knocked severally and stood in front of his apartment till around 11 in the night before her mother called her to come back to the apartment. Gustav only told her he left for his work earlier, and she didn't need to bother about it. Gustav didn't even mention anything about killing another mixed breed. He decided it was better kept under the wraps, but he also figured Angie's father should receive a report. Angie kept staring at him weirdly inside the bus, thinking he was telling a lie, but after seeing the serious expression on his face, she didn't know what to believe. Should I tell him I heard sounds coming from inside his apartment yesterday night? Angie wondered internally. She didn't get enough time to ponder about it before they got to their destination. Gustav wasted no time in getting off the bus and bidding farewell to Angie. Angie decided to throw it to the back of her mind and head towards school. I'll argue about this with him later. The school was pretty much lively today but boring to Gustav. All of his classmates were excited about the upcoming exchange event. Some perverted guys were already thinking about how they would get hookups with girls from the other schools. It was a 3-day event, which meant accommodations would be put in place. Also, in their free time they would be able to mess around and do whatever they liked. Gustav only shared their enthusiasm for the event because he was going to be traveling past the border. Oh, I forgot to ask Angie if their school was also invited. Gustav remembered this and decided to ask Angie later. The day went by uneventful again, but Gustav was already plotting something internally. Just like that, another 3 days had gone by and it was Monday again. During this time, the wariness Gustav felt when he entered his apartment the other day had faded away. But even with that, he still decided to install security protocols in his apartment. Gustav was walking towards his apartment from the stall with 2 boxes in his hands. Miss Amy gave him a free day because of the security protocols he wanted to install in his apartment. He got to a corner in the 2nd Street and was about to turn left when he suddenly felt a sense of dread. He paused and looked left and right repeatedly but couldn't see anything around him. He turned around. Still, there was nothing. Just as he wanted to step forward, thinking it was a misinterpretation of his perception. "Don't move, kid!" he heard a voice behind him. Chapter 64. The voice sounded really familiar to him. The person had appeared behind him almost in an instant. Gustav's face darkened. I didn't even sense his approach, even though he's within my range of perception. "For your own good you shouldn't move." The person spoke again. "This is the same guy from the forest?" Gustav recalled. Now that Gustav wasn't as weak as he used to be, he could sense how dangerous this person was. He now understood that if the system didn't teleport him home, there was no way he would have managed to escape. Sprint has been activated. Gustav wasted no time in activating Sprint. He didn't have to think twice about it. All his senses were telling him right now was, "Run!" Gustav crossed over 150 feet in one movement after taking a step forward. Wind blew fiercely as his figure streaked across the street. Instead of running towards the neighborhood, he was running towards where he was coming from. Gustav turned his neck around to look back as he crossed the 200 feet. Immediately after turning around, saw a palm covering his entire line of sight. "This time I won't mess around with you." The voice sounded out again as Gustav's vision was blocked completely. Grab. It was way too fast for him. Even though he was currently using Sprint, this person was like 10 times faster. Before Gustav could even react to the grip, his body was lifted in the air. "Don't blame me for doing this. You're a disobedient kid." Those words drifted into his ears before he suddenly felt his body descend with speed. Bang! His head slammed into a very hard surface, causing him to pass out immediately. The person who had done the deed grabbed Gustav by the head and lifted him. On the street, a man in a tight-fitted black bodysuit and a half-green mask could be seen lifting a boy off the ground. The ground had cracks across the surface, and a small pool of blood could be seen in the middle of the cracks. The man was currently holding on to Gustav, who had blood smeared all over his face, and blood kept streaming down his head. His eyes were closed, and his arms were stationed on both sides of his body without making any movements. It was obvious that he had passed out. "Did I use too much power?" "He passed out pretty quickly," the man said internally as he stared at Gustav while still lifting him above the ground. He was really feeling a sense of urgency, and wanted to get things done as quickly as possible. "Well, fix him with healing meds. Time to get out of here." After he came to this conclusion, he pressed the green button placed on the left side of his head. The people on the street currently were surprised to see what was happening. They only saw both of them appear out of thin air due to their speed, and before they knew it, the boy's head had been slammed onto the hard ground, causing it to split open. A black car that was similar to the length of a limousine drove into the street in midair and stopped before the man holding on to Gustav. The doors opened up and he threw Gustav in before entering himself. Whoosh! The car blazed across the street after turning around. In a few seconds they were out of sight. Chatter! 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 Dash! "What's happening?" Dash! "Who was that boy?" Dash! "He looked familiar, but everything happened too quickly. I couldn't catch a glimpse of him very well." Dash! "We need to call the police." Voices of the people that witnessed the scene could be heard. Truly, none of them were closer than 500 feet from the scene of the incident. Apart from that, it didn't even take up to 1 minute before the scene ended, so they were not able to see Gustav's face. This street was only 2 streets away from where Gustav's apartment was located, so it also happened to be among where he protected during the night. Had they seen him clearly, they would have recognized him. 30 minutes later, inside a dimly lit room, a person was strapped to a long bed-like chair. A black cover cloth was placed on this person's head, and metallic hands that extended from the bed-like chair held onto the person tightly, preventing any chance of escape. At the left corner of the room, 2 men in tight-fitted black bodysuits stood side opposite each other. They seemed to be in a discussion, and the man wearing a half-green mask held a purplish and blue helmet. This helmet had some aqua-colored stones embedded all over its surface which crackled with electricity. "We can't waste time in projecting and watching his memories since it happened 3 months ago." The man in green mask spoke with a tone of urgency. "Boss Eden, I can only suggest that we make use of the truth function and ask him specific questions to make our interrogation faster," the other man suggested. "Let's go with that. We don't have the time to be sorting through his memories." "Well, ask him specific questions about that day. Although he might become a vegetable due to his young age, we will have to risk it. No matter how powerful she is, she won't be able to trace who turned him into a vegetable." The man with the green mask, known as Eden, agreed. After concluding, they walked towards the person strapped on the chair. After arriving before him, Eden grabbed the piece of clothing and pulled it off, revealing the face of a blonde teenage boy. The teenage boy, who was obviously Gustav, stared at the man with a cold look. "Good thing you're awake now. Looks like the healing med worked just fine. If you had just listened and didn't run, I wouldn't have had to crack your skull open," he said with a slightly bitter tone. "Who are you and what do you want? Why are you after me? Why did you break into my apartment?" Gustav threw a series of questions at the man with a look of wariness. "You don't need to know who I am. All I want is for you to tell me what happened 3 months ago in that forest mountain area. I'm sure you already remember me from that day." Eden spoke while bending down to stare into Gustav's eyes. "Now tell me what happened to the mountain. There is no way you didn't witness what happened since you were in your school uniform. It means you were there the whole night. Especially after I found out your residential address is far from that place." I don't even care about how you evaded me during these 3 months. All I want to know is, what happened in that mountain region? Eden stared intently at Gustav as he questioned. Gustav stared back at him for a few seconds before speaking. Beats me. I have no idea about what happened to the mountain, Gustav said with a look of certainty. Why kidnap me when you should be calling an orologist to investigate? Gustav asked with an irritated expression. Oh, you're not meant to answer until after wearing this, Eden replied while raising the helmet. What is that? Gustav suddenly became wary upon seeing the helmet cackling with electricity at the top. Chapter 65. Oh, this is something that will help you in spouting the truth. Eden pushed the helmet towards Gustav's head and tried to put it on for him. I won't let you. Gustav shifted his head towards the side, causing the helmet to be placed on his neck. Behave yourself. I don't have the time to mess around. Eden shouted out and shifted the helmet towards Gustav, who was still moving his head around trying to dodge it. Grab. Eden grabbed Gustav's chin with his left hand and forcefully held his head in place before placing the helmet on his head. NH. No. GRHH. Gustav muttered some incoherent words while trying to move his head, but it was to no avail. The grip was so powerful that he could hardly make noises. He could already tell what the function of the helmet was, but he was powerless to try and stop it. No! 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 Gustav kept screaming inwardly. He didn't want the secret of the system to be exposed, but he wasn't strong enough. This was the brain tweak device, and one of its functions was to force a person to answer truthfully to any questions asked. Even if he decided to transform, he wouldn't be able to break through the bonds holding him down. Even if he could break through, the man in front of him was more powerful than he was, and that would also reveal his ability. Activate it, Eden said to the man beside him. The man nodded and clicked on a button behind the helmet. Crackle! 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 The electric sparks on the helmet grew in number and size, causing Gustav's eyes to widen in pain. In a few seconds, his eyes turned listless. Eden stared at Gustav's expression, which looked like he was awake but also asleep. The brain tweak device is currently functioning, the man beside him stated. What is your name? Eden asked. I am Gustav Oslov. Gustav answered like a robot. He looked like a puppet at this moment. Good, it works with no issue, that's the brat's full name, the man beside him confirmed. Now tell me what happened in that mountainside 3 months ago. Tell me what happened from your time of arrival in that forest, Eden commanded. Gustav, whose eyes still looked like that of a lifeless puppet, started speaking. On that day, I went to the forest to go commit suicide. In the neighborhood, more than 30 minutes had gone by and people were still talking about what happened. Angie was walking across that particular street trying to trace Gustav. She had been waiting for Gustav to arrive since she saw him leaving his apartment earlier. Since he said he was going to get some things at the stall that was only 3 streets away, she expected him to have arrived by now. She noticed the people outside their houses talking to some cops. Why are the cops here? She wondered as she moved closer to check out what was going on. So you can't describe the face of this person? Officer, not only were we distant from the scene, but they were also moving too fast for us to see their figures properly, and when they stopped moving, a car arrived instantly to pick up the kidnapper and the boy. Angie could hear the discussion between the police officer and one of the people in the neighborhood who witnessed the crime. Kidnapper? Angie moved closer to listen properly. So from his figure you could tell that it was a kid? Yes, officer, the boy that was taken away was certainly a teenager. And from their movements, the boy included, they are mixed bloods? They are definitely mixed bloods. The boy also suddenly appeared just like the man, so it's very obvious that the both of them are mixed bloods. At this point, Angie was already starting to have a bad feeling in her heart. She kept listening, feeling like some important information was coming next. So there's no way to identify this boy? Officer, if you were here when it happened, you will understand what I mean. Their figures were practically blurred due to their speed. Dash. With the way the situation is, we might not be able to do anything since we can't get a single form of description. Dash. Officer, if I remember correctly. Although they moved quite fast, I'm sure the boy had blonde hair. Yes, blonde hair. They moved about quite fast, but I could at least point out that color. Immediately after Angie heard that, her mind froze. Blonde hair? Although it could be another person, since having blonde hair wasn't exclusive to a single person, but Angie knew that only one person in this neighborhood had blonde hair, and was also a mixed blood that surpassed her in the speed she had always been proud of. She started panicking. Oh my God! What do I do? She didn't try to go meet the police because she knew that in this situation they wouldn't be able to do much, or do anything at all. The cops around here were weaker than Gustav, so for him to be taken meant there were stronger forces at work here. She kept thinking of who she could go meet. She suddenly remembered something. He always headed for the Gammy dojo after school to train with his teacher. She's the only one I can go meet. Angie remembered asking Gustav why he never came home with her. At first, he didn't want to tell her, but after she disturbed him for an answer repeatedly, he finally gave in and told her about the dojo. Angie quickly sped off towards the nearest bus station to hitch a ride. This was the first time she was feeling so tensed. She didn't know if she would be allowed to enter into the dojo, but she had no choice but to try. 5 minutes later, Angie alighted from the bus, and ahead of her was a huge 700-floor-story building. She quickly ran towards it. The 4 bulky men in front of the entrance noticed her, and called out to her to stop running. Angie paused her steps in front of them and politely asked for permission to go in. Dash. Young girl, I don't know who you are and where you have come from, so I will explain to you. This is the Octavia Group business building. Without proper identification you can't get in. Please, it's an emergency. I just need to inform a teacher here about her student. Angie pleaded. Dash. I'm sorry, but I cannot let you in. Call that teacher on your communication device. I don't have any means of contacting her. Please let me in. It's urgent. Angie kept begging, but the guards wouldn't listen to her. They asked her to leave, but she didn't comply. She kept begging and shouting. Her voice even attracted the people within the vicinity. Some of them that were coming out from the building had looks of disgust and suggested for her to be thrown far from the premises. Even with the looks of contempt and disgust, Angie kept begging. The guards couldn't take it anymore. One of them moved forward to grab her when a voice was heard from behind. Falco, what's happening? A smooth feminine voice made him pause. The guards turned around and noticed the lady in red walking out of the building. Young miss. The guards bowed slightly to her as she walked over. Chapter 66. This young lady is disturbing the peace of surroundings. She keeps asking to go in without an identification. The guard said to the lady in red that had just arrived. Please, I need to see her, it's urgent. The more time we spend here, the more dangerous it becomes. Angie shouted out again. The guard turned around to grab Angie again after she shouted that out. Falco, wait! The lady in red commanded. She walked towards them and stood in front of Angie. Who is this person you're referring to? She asked. Maybe I can help you pass the message across, she proposed with a friendly look. She's a teacher here. Her name is Miss Amy, Angie responded to the lady. The guard's eyes slightly widened. She's looking for young miss? The guards were surprised by this revelation. Angie noticed the reactions of everyone around her were a little bizarre, including the lady who was staring at her with a contemplative gaze like she was trying to figure out whether they had met before. Tell me, kiddo. Why are you looking for me? Angie heard the female ask her this, and her mouth hung open in surprise. You're Miss Amy? Angie asked. A few minutes later, Angie had finished explaining everything that happened to Miss Amy. Miss Amy's expression was surprisingly looking bright after hearing that. She had a smile hung on her face as she stared at Angie. The guards felt a chill run down their spine when they saw the smile. Everyone knew that she wasn't the type to smile unless something disastrous was about to go down. Angie. That's your name, right? Miss Amy asked. H&M. Angie nodded in affirmation. What are we going to do, miss? She inquired. Not we, Miss Amy answered. Suddenly a chill spread through the air as Miss Amy's smile grew broader, which made Angie look confused. She wondered why Miss Amy would be smiling, but she could undeniably feel the chill spreading across the place. Go home, it'll take care of this, Miss Amy said and walked forward. The ice-cold tone at which Miss Amy spoke left no room for debate. Although Angie was still worried, she had no choice but to comply. She stared at Miss Amy's back, which was currently getting farther and farther away. Miss Amy, will he be all right? Angie shouted this out subconsciously. Miss Amy paused in front of her hover bike before tilting her head towards the left to stare at Angie. I don't know, but for the sake of the captives, he'd better be all right, Miss Amy answered. The amount of bloodlust her words exuded caused the guards along with the people in the vicinity to shiver subconsciously. Miss Amy sat on her bike and started the engine before zooming off. A few minutes later Miss Amy arrived in front of a well-secured and barricaded area. This place seemed to be swarming with different kinds of security operatives that moved around the vicinity. Most of them were laced in armor-like uniforms. The space within the walls that barricaded this environment was as wide as a small city. The tallest building in Plankton City happened to be located inside this well-guarded stronghold. Miss Amy stared at the rocket-shaped building up ahead that happened to be so tall that its top couldn't be seen. She sighed in dissatisfaction before moving towards the entrance of the stronghold, where tons of guards clad in intimidating-looking sci-fi-like armors could be seen. Inside the darkroom where Gustav was kept captive, Eden stood in front of Gustav, who had just finished speaking. Is that all? He asked. Yes, that was everything that happened during the time I was within that forest. Gustav's eyes still had a listless look as he spoke. Now we know everything that happened, Eden said with a low tone. Miss Amy stood in front of a large room filled with holographic computers and a multitude of technological pieces of equipment. A group of people in orange uniforms could be seen moving from place to place within this room. Some were handling the computer devices which showed the state of different places in the planet. Beside Miss Amy was a man clad in dark orange uniform with black stripes. He sported light green hair and was pretty short in height. Around 45 in height. To what do I owe this visit? Amy, he said with a playful tone while chuckling. I don't have time to mess around. I need you to use the Orion satellite to track someone for me, Miss Amy stated without extending any greetings. So sharp, so straight to the point. But seeing your urgent looks, I have to use this to my advantage and make a deal with you first. The man smiled sheepishly as he spoke. Miss Amy kept glared daggers at him before answering. Fine. It's time to get this kid back before that woman figures out anything. We'll decide what to do next after giving young Master Young feedback about his narrative, Eden said while pulling off the helmet from Gustav's head. Camphor, take him back to his apartment, Eden called out to the other man. The man nodded and started unhooking the metallic holds strapping Gustav to the chair. After he completed that, he tapped Gustav. Get up, kid! He demanded, but there was no answer. Hey kid, get up! He called out again, but there was no response once again. The man stared at Gustav's face in confusion and noticed that his eyes were the same as before. Listless. Boss Eden, I think this one is gone, Camphor said while raising his hand and placing it in front of Gustav's face. He waved his hand repeatedly, looking for signs that Gustav had regained his normal consciousness, but there was no reaction whatsoever. He grabbed Guada's arm, raised it, and dropped it. The arm dropped back towards Gustav's side like he was dead. He's underage, so it's normal for this to happen. Just get him out of here, Eden said with a slightly annoyed tone. The man nodded and lifted Gustav upon his right shoulder before walking out the exit. Inside the technology room, Miss Amy was still speaking to the short man. Accepted, just find him for me, Miss Amy said to the man, who showed a shocked expression on his face. You accepted without even listening to my demand first? The man said that with a dumbfounded look. What if I make unreasonable demands? He questioned. Do not waste my time, Zack, find him for me, or do you wish to die? Miss Amy's face darkened as she threatened him. Chapter 67. The smile on the man's face disappeared as he noticed her glare. Ahem, give me his life signs, Zack demanded. His life signs. Before Miss Amy could complete her statement, she heard a ring. Traying. 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 Miss Amy took a small button from her sleeves area and placed it on the left side of her head. Miss Amy's eyes slightly widened in astonishment as a masculine voice drifted into her mind. Gustav? Are you all right? She voiced out with a worried tone. Good, where are you? She replied with a tone of relief. Zack watched from the side with a confused look. He could already guess that she was communicating with the person she came to search for, which had him wondering what exactly happened in the first place. All right, I'm coming, Miss Amy said and removed the button from the side of her head before turning around. The deal is off, Zack, she said and walked out of the room. Zack stared at her back and sighed. So much for getting my hopes up. I thought I could finally get her to do something for me. Eden stood at the left corner of the darkroom. He was speaking to someone with a communication button glued to the side of his head. These days, easy communication was possible with the use of these technological buttons. Calls could be answered with a thought, so there was no need to bring out the device. It was mostly used on the battlefield for communication. A person could be fighting battles and receiving instructions at the same time. Also, in this age where bloodline abilities existed, some mixed bloods could listen to people talk from afar, but with this, it would be impossible for someone to eavesdrop on your conversation, since the voice of the person on the other end was going directly into your mind and not your ears. Yes, young Master Young, we just finished interrogating him using the brain tweak helmet. Yes, he recounted the whole train of events. Yes. Yes. I was surprised also. Everything adds up now. Yes, young Master Young. I will give you the full details once I return. Eden's voice could be heard multiple times. Should I also inform him about how that kid happened to use a speed that was on par with a serial-ranked mixed blood? According to the information gathered, he's only an F grade. How would he be able to use such power? Eden wanted to ask Gustav about this, but there was no time for that. Well, he's now a vegetable. This practically spells the end for him, so I don't think Master Young needs to know, Eden concluded. All right, young Master Young, I will be leaving the facility in a few, understood? He voiced out before the call ended. After the call ended, Eden walked towards the bed-like chair that Gustav was strapped on before. He arrived before it, and reached out his hand to grab the helmet when... boom! The wall behind him blasted apart. Huh! Eden turned around in shock to look behind him, but he saw nothing. He suddenly felt wary. Who's there? He shouted out while looking left and right. Show yourself! He shouted out again as his arm suddenly turned shadowy and he raised it. I will kill you if you don't reveal yourself before me. He started walking forward slowly with a look of caution while looking left and right severally. Sometimes he would even rotate just to check behind him, but even after doing that for more than 1 minute, he still didn't see anyone. What is going on? There's no way the wall just exploded on its own. He could see the bright corridor from the space within the broken wall up ahead, but he couldn't understand how the wall could explode by itself. It didn't explode by itself. I'm responsible for that. He suddenly heard a cold feminine voice whisper into his left ear. Who are? He quickly turned around while speaking, only for him to notice a fist headed for his face. Bang! A loud bone-cracking sound rang out upon collision, causing Eden's face to cave in as the fist buried itself 2 inches deep into his face before throwing him backward. Whoosh! The half-green mask on his face broke to pieces, revealing a half-burnt face. Splurt! Part of his face cracked open as blood came spilling out of his face while he was being catapulted backward in midair. He couldn't even scream in pain due to the destruction of his face. Bang! His body slammed into the wall and broke through it. Bang! 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 His body kept crashing through the walls in a straight line until it finally came to a stop, several hundred feet ahead. From within the darkroom, the body-shaped holes within the walls could be seen. Swoosh! A red figure dashed through the holes with intense speed, causing more parts of the walls to break and expanding the size of the holes. The figure came to a stop before the body of Eden, which was laying on the floor with a sunken face. A fountain of blood was spilling from his face and head. The figure, who happened to be Miss Amy, raised her foot and stomped down upon his face again. Bang! The sound of flesh being mangled and hard skull cracking resounded across the place as blood spilled across the floor. You really have guts! For you to lay hands on my student! Miss Amy's voice was cold as ice. How dare you! Stomp! How dare you! Stomp! How dare you! Stomp! How dare you! This time she raised her foot very high and stomped on his chest. Bang! Her foot crushed his sternum and down his lungs, causing another splatter of blood. Miss Amy raised her blood-soaked foot and placed them on the floor back. Her blue shoe was soaked in blood. She noticed the man was no longer moving and squatted to pick him up. She held onto his head that was battered beyond recognition and raised it. She picked a pill out from her storage device and looked for his mouth, which was almost missing due to the disastrous way his face looked. She placed the pill in his mouth. You're not dying on me yet. You still have a lot of pain to go through at my hands, Miss Amy voiced out while dragging him by the hair towards the darkroom where Gustav was held captive. Eden's face was slowly recovering, along with his chest and lungs. His body was healing up at a very fast rate, as it would seem Miss Amy gave him a very high-graded healing medicine. Miss Amy dragged him back into the room and lifted him. You will tell me who you work for and why you came after him, Miss Amy stated with a threatening tone. Eden was starting to regain consciousness after the initial beating. He shivered upon seeing her face. Ash-colored hair, beautiful but very cold looks. It reminded him of young Master Young. It's her. I'm finished. A cold stream of sweats ran down his bloody back. Before you tell me what I want to hear, Miss Amy said while dashing towards the wall on the right and holding on to his hair. Swoosh! She arrived before the wall and paused her movement before smashing his face into it. Bang! Chapter 68. Bang! Eden's face crashed through the wall, causing debris to scatter across the place. Miss Amy dragged him by the hair again and dashed towards the wall on the other side. Bang! She slammed his face into the wall again, causing it to collapse entirely, but she still wasn't done yet. Swoosh! Bang! Swoosh! Bang! Swoosh! Bang! Swoosh! Bang! Swoosh! Bang! She repeated the same actions severally until there were no walls left within the vicinity. Only corridors that led to different places within the facility could be seen. But it would seem Miss Amy wasn't satisfied with the pain she had inflicted on him. She clenched his hair tight and used it to lift him. Eden's face was practically crushed again. His teeth were missing, his nose completely caved into his face, both eyes were swollen and bleeding. Miss Amy brought out another pill and placed it in his mouth. He started healing up once again. Immediately he regained consciousness. He started pleading for mercy, but Miss Amy acted like she couldn't hear him. There were no longer walls, but the ground was available. She lifted him high before slamming his face down with intensity. Boom! This time it sounded like an earthquake as the ground split open. Cracks covered a radius of over 500 feet from the point of impact. Miss Amy lifted Eden by the head again and raised him high up before slamming his face back onto the ground. Boom! 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 The entire structure shook like it was going to come crashing down as Miss Amy slammed Eden's face into the ground repeatedly. A small pool of blood was already forming within the 3 feet wide hole that Eden's face had created from being slammed on the ground repeatedly. Miss Amy raised Eden by his hair again and placed another healing pill in his mouth. Plese, justklme, Eden voiced out hoarsely. Kill? Miss Amy said rhetorically. It's too early for that. I haven't even started. Miss Amy, as she dragged him across the ground towards the bed-like chair on the left side of the room. You strapped him on this chair, didn't you? Miss Amy asked another rhetorical question before she lifted him again and placed him on the chair. Eden was like a weak and defenseless chicken before her. Miss Amy strapped him to the mechanical chair that was glued to the hard ground. She held on to Eden's head again and stared into his eyes with a devilish smile on her face. How do you think it would feel to lose a body part, and have it regenerated only for you to lose it again, and have it regenerated once again? Wouldn't the repetition of this procedure be magnificent? Eden's eyes widened in fear as he heard that. "No, please, no!" He started begging once again. Miss Amy acted like she wasn't listening and moved towards his right. She grabbed his right arm and released it from being strapped. "Why don't we start with this one?" Miss Amy said with a smirk. "No, please don't." Eden tried pulling his arm back as he begged. Miss Amy smiled once again while her grip on his arm became stronger. "No, please don't, Dio." Eden was still trying to plead with her when Miss Amy pulled his arm with force. Yank! The sound of tendons and cartilage forcefully being ripped apart reverberated across the room. "Kairar!" He screamed out in pain like a pig being slaughtered as he stared at his right shoulder, which was spraying out a fountain of blood. His shoulder was missing an arm. Miss Amy raised the arm she tore off his shoulder and threw it towards the side. "Kairar!" Eden was still screaming in pain. He had never felt such pain since his arm had never been ripped off his shoulder before. Snot and tears filled his face. It was obvious that he was going through indescribable pain at this moment. He wanted to pass out to escape from feeling such pain, but he couldn't. He could only keep screaming out as he watched his shoulder squirt out more and more blood. "Oh, this is just the beginning. There's more to come," Miss Amy said as she walked over to Eden's left side. Eden, who was still in pain, slowly turned his head towards the side as he felt his left arm being gripped. His eyes were filled with dread as he saw Miss Amy holding onto his left arm. He wanted to plead again, but before he could, Miss Amy pulled his left arm with force again. Muscles and ligaments disconnected as his left arm was pulled out of its sockets. "Kyer!" Eden screamed out again after losing his second arm. Blood squirted out of the left side of his shoulder. Miss Amy threw the second arm away and moved towards his legs. In Gustav's apartment, he sat on his bed with a small triangular-looking device in his hand. "Why is Miss Amy taking so long?" Gustav questioned no one in particular with a low tone. "If she plans to check the place out, it should only take a few minutes." "It's been almost an hour now," Gustav muttered. He looked around with a contemplative expression. "To think I'd actually be taken because of the mountain phenomenon." Gustav's mind recalled the last day's event. After his head was slammed to the ground by Eden, he pretended to have passed out. The man was stronger than him, so trying to escape by using more power or transforming would only reveal more of his secrets, which would end up in disaster for him. Since he would still be taken either way, he decided to pretend that he had passed out, and made use of that opportunity to observe where he would be taken to using his perception. His perception granted him the ability to see his surroundings with his senses even if his eyes were closed. He memorized the path that the car took, the turning and movements. None of them escaped his senses. When he was strapped on the chair and noticed the brain tweak helmet, he thought that would be the end for him, since he might end up spewing the truth about everything. To his surprise, something happened when the helmet was placed on his head. Host brain functions are being hijacked by external forces, mental fortitude needed for blocking mind invasion. 25. Host has acquired enough mental fortitude to block mind invasion. Mind invasion has been successfully blocked. Chapter 69. When Gustav saw the notification, he was extremely shocked, but he was quick-witted enough not to show the expression of surprise on his face. He decided to act like his mind was actually being manipulated. Gustav pretended to be mind-controlled by the brain tweak helmet. The information he gave them about the mountain phenomenon was the same as what the locals around there gave. He only added more details to it than they did. He mentioned that there was an outburst of purplish electricity that sent destructive charges across the body of the mountain after the star slammed into it. Since he happened to be closer to the mountain than others, Eden didn't have a shred of doubt in Gustav's words. Gustav was able to easily deceive them with his actions due to the fact that they were in a hurry to get the information out of him and return him to his apartment. If they had studied him a bit more, they may have figured it out. Alas, they didn't. He could tell that they were tensed, but he didn't know why. Gustav also faked brain damage so they wouldn't feel cautious towards him. It would have been weird if he wasn't affected, since the brain tweak helmet could even turn adults as old as 22 years into vegetables. He was able to get a proper outline of the facility, and the routes that led him there when he was being taken back to his apartment. He also sensed a destructive force within the facility that made him feel really suspicious towards the abductors. They were already suspicious for trying to abduct him in the first place, and successfully doing that now. He could already sense that they probably worked for a big shot in the city, since they could go around abducting people however they wanted. Gustav was afraid they knew about the system earlier, whenever he recalled almost being abducted 3 months back, but now he had confirmed that they didn't know anything about it. They were only suspicious about the energy that radiated from the mountain after the impact of the blast that led to it being halved. Gustav knew the energy probably came from the system which was now inside him, so it would definitely be a disaster if he revealed that. Gustav thanked his stars that he stuck with even distribution. If not, his mind would have probably been taken over. The destructive force he sensed within the facility made him feel more suspicious about these unknown people. Immediately he was returned to his apartment. He contacted Miss Amy. He was surprised that she already knew that he was abducted, since it happened only about 2 hours ago. He explained the situation to her, and where the facility was located. He had been returned to his apartment an hour ago, which was also when he spoke to her. Gustav had tried contacting Miss Amy again after this, but he couldn't connect to her device. Gustav decided to open the system interface to check on his attributes. Host attributes: name, Gustav, level 5, class EXP 1850/25000 HP, 320/320 energy, 150/150, attributes: strength, 34 perception, 34 mental fortitude, 34 agility, 34 speed, 34 bravery, 34 intelligence, 34 charm, 34 attributes points, 24. He had evenly distributed all the points, and kept stored some for emergencies, so even if his mental fortitude wasn't up enough, he would have been able to add more points to it in that situation to save himself. Doesn't this mean mental fortitude can protect from anything that has to do with mind control? This made Gustav see mental fortitude in a new light. He didn't see it as a necessary stat beforehand, yet he placed points in it like the others. Now that he understood what it could do, he realized that it could turn out to be a very useful attribute. Protection for the mind was absolutely necessary. His perception and intelligence had also helped him today. He was able to properly analyze the routes taken to get to the facility due to his perception, while his intelligence helped him in memorizing every single turn and swerve. He was even able to calculate the distance from the street he was abducted down to the facility. The facility happened to be an underground laboratory located towards the east of the city. That particular area wasn't too far from the mountain he usually visited when he tried committing suicide. He was able to easily describe how to get there to Miss Amy. Gustav checked some other things before he stood up and walked towards the door. He was tired of sitting around. The suspense was already killing him. He wanted to know what was happening, and if Miss Amy had checked out the facility like she said she would. He had decided he would visit that mountain region again. His apartment door slid open and he walked out. Immediately he arrived in the corridor, he saw Angie approaching his apartment from the other end. "Gustav?" Angie voiced out in confusion as she stood in place with a surprised look. "Hey, Angie." Gustav kept walking forward with a smile on his face. Angie ran forward and grabbed hold of Gustav. "Are you okay? Did they harm you?" she asked while checking Gustav's body for injuries. "I'm okay." Gustav smiled warmly while answering. "Thanks for informing my teacher, Angie," he added with a look of gratitude. Angie was smitten by his charming smile, which was very rare. She stared at him for a few seconds before turning her head towards the side in embarrassment. "It's nothing," she replied. How did you know I was abducted? How did you escape from there? Both of them asked at the same time, with Gustav being the former, and Angie being the latter. Hee. Angie smiled sheepishly. I'll answer first then. Gustav was about to reply to her when he sensed something and stared at the stair area. Calm. 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 The sound of heels colliding with the ground could be heard. A female in black top and blue jeans entered into the corridor from the stairways. She noticed the duo and started walking towards them. Angie also heard the sound of footsteps and turned around to see who was approaching. Miss Amy! Gustav and Angie voiced out together. Miss Amy arrived before them and also stared at Gustav in a similar way to how Angie did. Are you okay? She asked with a worried tone. I'm fine, Miss Amy. Nothing of consequence happened, Gustav answered. Miss Amy nodded with a relieved look. Did Miss Amy go shopping? Angie voiced out with a look of bewilderment as she stared at Miss Amy's wear, which was different from what she saw her clothed in earlier. Oh, I couldn't help it since my wares had stains. Although the color of the stains has certain similarities with the color of my initial clothing, it won't be sensible to keep wearing it, Miss Amy explained. Gustav didn't have an idea of what Miss Amy was putting on earlier, so he didn't make much of her words. Gustav, let's go, we have to talk, Miss Amy said and walked forward. Angie'll see you later. Gustav turned around and walked towards Miss Amy. Bye, Gustav. Angie waved at Gustav as she spoke. Miss Amy got to Gustav's door, and it slid open for her without having to use keys. Gustav's mouth hung wide open as he saw that. His jaw was nearly falling to the floor. How did you get it to open without a key? Gustav asked Miss Amy after entering his apartment. Your security details suck over here. A burglar could easily break into your home, Miss Amy answered bluntly. Looks like the installments of security protocols are really needed, Gustav sighed internally. By the way, Miss Amy, how did you know that this was my apartment? You've never been to my apartment, Gustav asked with a dumbfounded look. Are you sure about that? Miss Amy smiled with a playful look. Ugh! Gustav exclaimed with a look of confusion. Anyways, we have other important things to discuss. Miss Amy's voice suddenly became solemn when she said this. Chapter 70. Did you discover the place? Gustav asked while sitting on the couch. Miss Amy also sat opposite him. Did your abductor look like this? Miss Amy brought out a rectangular device and tapped on the screen. A holographic image of Eden wearing his half-green mask was displayed. Yes, that's him, but he wasn't alone, there was also another. Before Gustav could complete his sentence, another holographic image was shown. This time another face was displayed. It was a man sporting yellow hair and beards. Gustav recognized this man as the second person within the room, who also happened to be inside the car that they used in transporting him to the underground facility. Yes, he's also one of them, Gustav stated as he pointed at the projected image. Good, looks like the hospital didn't receive the wrong guests. On hearing that, Gustav could already sense that something must have gone down. Miss Amy, what did you do? Gustav asked. Nothing much. Just put a group of people in a state where they'll never be able to bother anyone again. While Miss Amy was speaking, more projections were displayed one after the other. Gustav was only able to recognize 3 earlier, the rest of the 7 were unknown to him. Looks like Miss Amy went on a full rating session. That's probably why she came so late. Gustav was gobsmacked as he came to this realization. Miss Amy, did they say anything about who sent them? Gustav inquired. About that, it's a very tricky person. This person happens to be the brother of Hung Jo, your former classmate. His name is Young Jo, Miss Amy revealed. Also the first son of the Jo technological industry that helps the MBO create their weapons, armors, and other tools, Miss Amy added. Gustav's eyes slightly widened in realization. Is it because of that? Gustav asked. No, far from it. He has no idea about what you did to Hung Jo. You just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, Miss Amy responded. Gustav sighed in relief after hearing that, But if I wasn't there, he'll probably not receive this power. Gustav shrugged internally. There was no way he would change his decision of going to that mountainside to experience the same thing all over again if he traveled back in time. He's the type that is very shrewd, cunning, and meticulous. Even though I've found out that he's responsible for this, there is no way to deal with him on the surface, but I have managed to place the MBO on his tail, so he will have to lay low for now, Miss Amy said. She noticed the slight look of distraught on Gustav's face and added, "You don't have to worry about it. Such people won't come after you again, I can guarantee that. You just have to focus on your path. I won't deal with your peers for you, but when it comes to big bullies like these old bastards that are beyond you, I'll step in," Miss Amy assured Gustav. H&M, thanks Miss Amy. Gustav smiled while replying. Miss Amy returned the smile for a few seconds before her face became solemn again. I found what you were referring to. And just as you said, it was truly something dangerous, Miss Amy stated. What is it, Miss Amy? Gustav asked with an intrigued look. That facility has been experimenting on mixture of energies, Miss Amy replied. Mixture of energies? Gustav asked with a confused look. Are you aware of the different energy crystals mined underground? Miss Amy asked. Yes, my F.A. The man who biologically brought me into this world works as a miner, so I know a bit about it, Gustav said with a contemplative look. There are several hundred mines all over the world, but only 7 different energy crystals exist which can be used for different technological purposes. According to a ton of research, due to their diversity. Gustav's eyes suddenly widened when he got to this point. Mixing them can cause a catastrophic disaster since they happen to be unstable together. Miss Amy nodded in affirmation. It is against the law to mix them. A crime punishable by death because experiments like that have been performed in the past which led to the destruction of an entire city, Miss Amy said with a dark look. Gustav gasped in shock upon hearing that. Destruction of an entire city? It was nearly unbelievable for him, but he had to believe it since it was coming from Miss Amy's mouth. In this age, destroying an entire city was practically an impossible feat because different technological security protocols are put in place. If an alien race tried to invade in this age, they would find out that the Earth is not an easy target. This made Gustav believe it to be impossible for a city to be destroyed no matter how powerful the cause was supposed to be, but now his beliefs were being overthrown again. The amount of energy that is created from mixing the power contained within the energy crystals is capable of causing extinction to all races living on Earth, and according to the Slarkovs, this was one of the reasons for the destruction of their planet thousands of years ago. Miss Amy explained with a slightly worried tone. Gustav couldn't imagine how powerful such energies were after hearing this, but it made him wonder why anyone would try mixing them since they have been proven to be dangerous. This is his doing, but the reasons for him mixing those energies are unknown. It might be a little hard to tackle him since he's very good at hiding his tracks. Even this incident cannot be connected to him, Miss Amy said. Then what do we do now? Gustav asked. Not we, this matter is none of your business anymore. It's up to the MBO to investigate now. I'm only telling you about it because you kind of got involved. He's probably forgotten about you now since you have nothing to do with whatever he's planning, Miss Amy said. Gustav nodded in understanding to her response. You did well in quickly informing me about the location. Now those people will owe me a favor. I should take you out on a date again, Miss Amy voiced with a smile. But he'll probably be busy for a while. I don't mind, whenever you're ready, Miss Amy. Gustav was now feeling slightly relieved, but there was still a nagging feeling deep down like he could sense that this still had a kind of connection to him. He decided to place that feeling behind him. Chapter 71. The next morning Gustav woke up at his regular timing. He still couldn't forget yesterday's events, but Miss Amy's assurance made him feel less cautious. He still went for his usual neighborhood watch last night, even though he knew mixed breeds were unlikely to show up, and truly none showed up. Gustav got prepared for school and left with Angie once again. Several minutes later he had arrived at the school and headed for the kitchen to start his morning job. Boss Danzo had noticed the changes in Gustav. him growing colder and colder by the day. Although he never showed Boss Danzo that side of him, Boss Danzo was vigilant enough to notice this. He decided he would talk with Gustav one of these days. During the school activities, the students were paired in the training hall to spar with one another due to the upcoming exchange event. Gustav was paired with a student of Class 3D, and who also happened to be a D-grade mixed blood. The spars were for the purpose of training them, and it started last week. Gustav had been revealing a bit of his prowess since last week. He had been drawing attention to himself for some reason which was unknown to everyone. He would never use any bloodline abilities when sparring, but he would dodge every single attack from whoever he was sparring with, causing them to feel humiliated about not being able to touch him. Although he didn't reveal much, this was enough for him to draw attention to himself, since a mixed blood below F grade was able to avoid attacks of other higher graded mixed bloods. Everyone was busy with their sparring partners. There were many small circles in the hall. Everyone faced the sparring partner they were paired with, inside the circles. The small circles were barricaded by a blue glow that blocked the attacks from phasing out of the space so it wouldn't hit another person by mistake. There were hundreds of this small circle, and each one was as spacious as a boxing ring. Gustav was also within one, positioned at the west corner of the hall. Swoosh! Swoosh! Gustav swerved left and right as he dodged the circular balls of energy that were being sent at him. Swoosh! He sped towards the left side of the student he was sparring with. The student reacted by covering his right hand in a glow of blue energy before punching towards Gustav. Swoosh! Gustav dashed towards his back, causing the student to miss him. The student turned around and swung his hand towards the back, hoping to hit Gustav, but he was still too slow as Gustav dodged him. Gustav dashed towards his front again. The student was already starting to get frustrated, so he summoned a lot of blue energy balls. Pop! 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 20 of them appeared in midair and surrounded him. He sent them towards Gustav with speed. Each energy ball was the size of a fist. Swai! The balls traveled towards Gustav, cackling with a force that could easily tear a hole through a person. 5 of them appeared in front of him at the same time, only leaving small gaps between one another. Gustav moved towards the middle with speed as turned his body sideways. Since he didn't want to make use of dash, his normal speed was only a bit faster than these balls, so trying to dodge all of them seemed pretty impossible. Size manipulation. Immediately after Gustav said this in his mind, his body suddenly deflated. His chest and back seemed to be caving in like a balloon that was being deflated. He became so flat that he could be mistaken for plywood. Doing this, while his body was turned sideways, allowed the balls to miss him and keep flying forward. The student's mouth was wide open after seeing Gustav's performance. How was he able to do that? He wasn't the only person that saw Gustav do that. 2 more people whose circle happened to be positioned on their right saw him. Time to change partners, their instructor voiced out. The one on the left side was glaring at him with a weird look. Hey, Gustav, why don't you spar with me this time? The male student proposed. He was about 62 and had short orange-colored hair. He had a slim body but a very confident look that was very similar to a prideful one. His eyes were sharp and brimming with life. This student was the person Gustav had been aiming for since, reasons unknown. He wanted to spar with him to check out something, but he needed him to be the one to propose the spar. Charles Yemen. Gustav stared at him for a bit before answering. Sure. Gustav walked towards his circle while the student that was sparring with Charles earlier walked towards Gustav's former sparring partner. Hoo-hoo, Gordon, watch how it's done. It's pathetic that you can't land a single hit on him, Charles said with a look of contempt as he stared at Gustav's former partner. Some of the students around had forgotten that they were supposed to be sparring right now. They decided to watch Gustav spar with Charles. Gustav, not receiving a single hit since this training started, was already ticking off some people, but they didn't have the guts to go meet Gustav and ask for a sparring session with him, due to fear of being humiliated. Now that they were seeing that Charles and Gustav were about to spar, they believed Gustav would receive his retribution today. The blue glow barricaded the circle and they were surrounded by it. The same happened in the other circles, but some of them seemed to be focusing on Gustav's and Charles' circle instead of sparring. Surprisingly, their instructor, who happened to be watching from afar, didn't say anything about the students not minding their business. You seem to have gotten quite stronger recently. Ho, that won't help you in this situation. Charles laughed like a maniac as he stared at Gustav. Is this speech necessary? Don't waste my time with it. Gustav voiced out with a look of boredom. Charles' face twisted upon hearing that. Then I won't show you any mercy. Charles spoke with a dark look and dashed towards Gustav. Red electric snakes danced around his body as he arrived in front of Gustav after taking only a single step. Gustav swerved towards the side, dodging him by only a small margin. Charles noticed that he missed. He reacted by raised his hands and conjuring red electricity in between his palms before extending them out towards Gustav. A thick snaky line of red electric charges blasted towards Gustav. This was when Gustav finally activated dash. The speed of the snaky electricity was extremely fast, and he had already predicted this, so he activated dash before Charles was able to send it out. Gustav turned towards the right, causing the red electricity to miss him by only a few inches, but that wasn't all that happened. Gustav could feel a force from the electricity that was pushing him backward. He distanced himself more from the electricity charge while dash was still activated and felt the force decrease. If not for his activation of dash that practically slowed down everything around him, that force would have knocked him backward. Chapter 72. Just as I thought, it truly has gravitational force, Gustav analyzed as he moved towards Charles' back and tried to touch him. Due to the usage of dash, Charles was still moving in slow motion, but his eyes were able to follow Gustav. Charles wanted to change the direction of his attack to Gustav's new location, but even though his eyes were able to follow, his body movements were still slower. Gustav arrived behind him and pushed out his palm to touch Charles' back. Zun! When Gustav's palm was 3 inches away from touching Charles, it paused and was unable to move forward. Gustav was astonished but not surprised, cause he already sensed the force surrounding Charles that repelled any form of contact. Charles turned around and hurled his fist coated in electric snakes towards Gustav's chest. Gustav dodged it, of course, and dashed backward. How in the world is he able to move like that? Charles was shocked at Gustav's movement. The other students watching were just as shocked. They had no idea why Gustav would be able to move like that. Now I understand why his bloodline is compared to B- grade even though it's a C grade. That's pretty powerful, Gustav analyzed from the other side as both of them stared at one another with wary looks. Charles was already a Zulu rank 2, but Gustav noticed his strength was decent than most Zulu ranked mixed-bloods he had faced recently. This was mostly attributed to his bloodline ability that had gravitational force mixed in. Just because you can move that fast doesn't mean you can defeat me, you. Before Charles could finish his statement, Gustav gave a low bow and spoke. Thanks for the sparring session. After saying this, he walked out of the circle. Hey, wait, trash. I must trample you under my feet before you leave! Charles shouted out, but Gustav didn't reply. He kept walking till he left the area where the spar was taking place. Charles had a look of anguish as he saw Gustav ignore him. Chatter! 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 The hall became noisy after seeing that brief spar. Dash! Isn't he supposed to be weakling? Dash! Why is he able to move that fast? Although they have heard the news of how Gustav uses enhancement drugs, they were not so stupid as to not see that something was different about him. They couldn't tell what was happening, but they knew it would be impossible to make use of such drugs every single time, which further made them confused about the source of Gustav's improvement. Seeing the stares of everyone around him, Charles was enraged and started shouting for Gustav to come back into the circle so they could continue their spar, but his calls fell on deaf ears. Hey, instructor, I'm leaving. Gustav waved to the instructor as he headed out. The middle-aged-looking male instructor stared at Gustav with a look of confusion. Your class will be representing the school in the exchange event. Training is necessary, he voiced out. Nah, I'm not interested. Besides, what would Trash do in such an event? You're better off with those failures behind me, Gustav said and walked out with a smirk. Eh? The entire hall erupted in chaos after hearing Gustav's statement, but he wasn't fazed. He dipped his hands into his pockets and kept walking forward without looking back. The aloofness on his face along with the way he walked made everyone stare at him with a look of astonishment from behind. Even the instructor was shocked, but he couldn't do anything. He heard about Miss Amy training Gustav and suspected that his current improvement might have something to do with that. Also, he couldn't force Gustav to stay back since he had decided he wasn't participating. Gustav walked towards his personal training room within the hall. First phase completed, Gustav said internally with a smile as he stood within his training room. The day came to an end again quite uneventfully if Gustav's act was subtracted. After his training with Miss Amy today, she told him their training days would be shortened to 3 days a week. Gustav could tell that she seemed busy. She wasn't in school throughout the day. Even though he was still bothered by what happened recently, he decided to place it behind him and focus on the task at hand. Gustav arrived at his apartment and met Angie waiting in front of his door. "Hey Angie," Gustav greeted after seeing her. "Hey Gustav," Angie answered with a sweet smile. Is there a problem? Why are you standing at my door?" Gustav asked with an inquisitive gaze. He was starting to wonder if this would become a regular routine for her. "Yes. I mean no. I mean we have to talk," Angie stuttered repeatedly before completing her sentence. Gustav's left eyebrow slightly went up before he replied. "I already know what you want to talk about. The answer is no." "Go home, Angie," Gustav said and proceeded to open his door. Angie grabbed him from behind. "What if you're abducted again?" Angie said with a worried tone. "That won't happen. And even if it does, you won't be able to do anything about it," Gustav said and proceeded to open his door. "I'm sure I can help, I'm at Zulu rank already," Angie kept insisting. "The answer is no, Angie." Gustav walked forward, causing his cloth to slip from her grasp. "Sleeve!" The door slid open and closed back after Gustav walked in. Gustav frowned after entering his living room. Why is she so persistent? He pondered internally. After thinking for a few seconds, Gustav sighed. "She was smart enough to figure out that I was abducted and informed Miss Amy, so I have to give her the benefit of the doubt at least," Gustav said internally and turned around to open his door. He walked out and arrived at the corridor. You're still here?" Gustav voiced out in surprise. Angie was still standing beside his door. "I was leaving already." Angie pouted as she spoke, but she still stood in the same position. Chapter 73. I wanted to give you a chance, but since you said you're leaving, then alright, bye," Gustav said and turned around. "Eh? When did I say that?" Angie said with a frantic look as she reached out to grab him. "I thought you were leaving?" Gustav turned around with a look of confusion. "No, I'm not leaving, please give me a chance," Angie said with a pleading look. Gustav chuckled internally after seeing her reaction. "All right then," Gustav said with a solemn look. "Your bloodline grants you speed, right?" Gustav asked. Angie nodded in affirmation. "If you can beat me in a race, I'll let you join me during the night patrols," Gustav proposed. Angie's eyes slightly widened. "Beat you in a race?" she questioned with a doubt. "Yes, if you cannot do this, then I'm afraid you can't work with me." Gustav crossed his arms and leaned his back against his door while waiting for her response. "But this is unfair, you're obviously faster than I am," Angie said with a crestfallen look. "Then you won't be of much help since I can do what you're supposed to be good at, better than you can," Gustav said and proceeded to turn around once again. "Wait. I agree." Angie quickly stopped him before he headed in. Gustav smirked while facing the door before turning around. His face had returned to its usual aloofness after turning to face Angie. "Good. Remember, if you lose, you mustn't disturb me about joining me to observe the neighborhood," Gustav stated with a solemn voice. "H&M." Angie nodded in response. "Good, let's go," Gustav said and proceeded to walk forward. "Where are we going?" Angie asked. Just follow me, Gustav said with a commanding tone. Angie complied and followed Gustav. Some minutes later, Gustav and Angie had arrived at the sparse forest area behind the neighborhood. They stood in a particular spot where small trees could be seen scattered around. Gustav finally stopped walking when he arrived in between two trees that were spaced apart by 50 feet. We will be racing to that tree over there. Gustav pointed at a particular tree ahead that was more than 15 meters tall. It was one of the tallest trees around here, so even though it was a bit far, it could still be seen clearly. Their current distance from here to there was over 2,000 meters. The first to touch that tree wins, Gustav exclaimed. All right, Angie answered and got into a running stance. Gustav had remembered that Angie's speed before she got to the Zulu rank was around 40 feet per second. So he believed that even though she had gotten to the Zulu rank, she should at most have increased by 2 times. Which meant it would still take her more than a minute to get there, while he only needed to activate dash, and he would be able to arrive at the tree before 1 minute was up. New quest has been issued, race Angie without activating a speed-related ability. What the heck is this? Gustav stared at the notification with a puzzled look. Why now of all times? Is the system trying to shit on my head? Gustav couldn't understand the reason behind this sudden quest even though he tried. If he decided to try completing the quest, he would be using his normal speed, and at the moment, he had no idea about Angie's current speed. There was no way to figure out if he was faster or not. I can't lose this race and risk her coming along with me every night, Gustav pondered with a slightly worried look. Is everything all right? Angie asked from the side after noticing that Gustav kept staring forward weirdly. Yes, are you ready? Gustav asked. H&M. Angie replied with a small nod. On the count of 3. Gustav also got into a running stance. He crouched his knees a little as his face looked a bit more serious than it used to. 1. He started counting. 2. He stared forward at the tree ahead with concentration. 3. Immediately Gustav called out the third number. Both their bodies bolted forward with extreme speed. Swash! Swash! Their bodies blurred slightly as they traveled across the sparse forest region. In one movement they had both crossed 70 feet, causing mild winds to generate from their body movement as they streaked past small trees. They streaked past trees like phantoms, getting closer to the goal as seconds passed. Both of them were currently moving at the same amount of speed. Angie was surprised that she was able to keep up with Gustav as they raced. She moved slightly to the left as she ran, dodging a tree that was formerly in her path. Swerve! Swerve! Just like her, Gustav had to dodge several small trees on his path, but even with that, no one had surpassed the other in distance after running for 15 seconds. Tap! 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 Their tapping footsteps could be heard as they fiercely ran across the forest, causing small clouds of dust and leaves to gather in a straight line following their footsteps. Gustav and Angie already knew they were at the same level of speed at this time, so they both pushed themselves to move faster. As 30 seconds passed by, they crossed 1,000 meters. They were only about 1,500 meters away from the tree now. They both kept pushing as their speed increased to 80 feet per second. Gustav was already thinking about using dash as they closed in on the tree. He noticed that Angie was getting faster as they ran. Gustav had already pushed his normal speed to the limit, yet she was slowly surpassing him. He couldn't let Angie win, but he also didn't want to lose the quest. This put him in a dilemma. As they were 500 meters away from the tree, Gustav was starting to catch up with Angie again. She seems to be running out of stamina. Gustav turned his head to the side to stare at Angie after noticing that she had slowed down. Chapter 74. Huh! What's she doing? Gustav noticed that Angie had closed her eyes while running, yet she was still able to dodge the trees along her path. Angie, who had her eyes closed, suddenly opened them. If I'm going to win, it must be by an outstanding gap. As Angie said this in her mind, another horn could be seen growing out of her forehead. She initially had 2 horns, but with this, it became 3. Swoosh! Her speed suddenly increased exponentially. she starting racing ahead of Gustav. What? Gustav was surprised to see Angie suddenly grow another horn, which caused her speed to increase. In 5 seconds she had already surpassed Gustav by almost 50 feet. Gustav was struggling to catch up with her at this point. As they crossed another 100 meters, Gustav noticed that she was increasing the gap between them more. I have to use it, Gustav said in his mind after noticing the increase in the gap between them widened even further. Add 10 attributes points to speed. Plus 10 attributes points has been added to speed, swoosh. Gustav's speed also increased by a notch, and he started closing in Angie. Right now they were only 300 meters from the tree. Gustav was starting to close in the gap. From 50 feet, it reduced to 40 and then to 30 in a few seconds. Both of them were moving at a speed of around 100 feet per second, so even though Gustav was closing up on her, he calculated that she would still get to the tree before he did. At this point, they were around 100 meters away from getting to the tree and Gustav was 7 feet behind Angie. Add 5 attributes point to speed, Gustav said internally. Plus 5 attributes points has been added to speed, swoosh. Gustav's speed suddenly increased again. It was like adding nitro to a rocket launcher. In the next 3 seconds, the tree was already in front of Gustav. SHSSHHH. His feet slid across the ground after he came to a pause suddenly. Tap! Gustav placed his hand on the tree as he arrived before it. He sighed in relief and turned towards the left to stare at Angie. Huh! Angie was also staring back at him, and they both had their hands on the tree. A tie? Gustav had the urge to facepalm. Angie also had a crestfallen look on her face. I didn't win. They both removed their hands from the stem of the tree and turned around with a contemplative expression. There were trails of dust in the direction they were coming from. Angie's third horn slowly went back into her head. She had a fatigued expression on her face. It was obvious that what she just did took up a lot of her energy. So, what's going to happen now? Angie asked with a slightly timid look. Quest has been completed, rewards, 5000 EXP, all attribute stats +1, Gustav noted the completion of the quest and the rewards. I had to spend almost all my saved up points because of this, and yet. Gustav was disappointed at the rewards. He has decided that the next time he was given a quest similar to this by the system, he would ignore it. You didn't win, he said to Angie. Angie looked more down upon hearing that. But I also didn't win. Since it was a tie, I'll give you a chance based on my conditions, Gustav added. Angie's eyes widened in excitement. Really? She questioned. Yes, but only if you can accept my conditions, Gustav stated. I accept your conditions, Angie voiced out with a smile. What? You haven't even listened to them yet. Gustav had a, you must be kidding me, kind of look as he stared at Angie. I don't care what they are. I accept, Angie said again. Oh, is that so? Gustav said with a smirk as he moved closer to Angie. H&M. Angie nodded cutely. What if I asked you to do something shameless? Gustav said as he moved his face closer to hers. Angie gasped in surprise as she stared at Gustav's face that was only several centimeters from hers. Something shameless? Angie's face started turning red as naughty imaginations streamed into her mind. Gustav kept moving his face closer to hers while still smirking. Yes, if I asked you to do something shameless, would you agree to it? Gustav asked again. Angie had to keep moving backward till her back was placed against the tree. Gustav extended his arm forward and placed his palm on the body of the tree beside Angie's face. He moved his face closer to hers again while leaning on the tree with his hand. Angie's face had turned completely bead red at this moment. Gustav looked so devilishly charming with the smirk on his face as he looked into her eyes without breaking contact. Their faces were only 3 centimeters from touching. Well, would you? Gustav asked again. Why, yes. Angie shyly looked away as she answered. Gustav was kind of surprised by her answer. He moved his hand away from the tree and turned around to walk forward. His face had gone back to being poker-like. All right then. He turned around to face her once again. Angie stared at his expression with a look of confusion. She could call Gustav a devil with the way he was acting. One moment he was cold and the next, he was seductive only for him to go back to being indifferent. I have a few conditions in mind. Gustav started speaking again. A few hours later Gustav was already back in his apartment making more research on mixed breeds. Occasionally his thoughts would drift back to his race with Angie. He still wondered why she said she would agree to any of his demands regardless of what it was. Till now he didn't understand her thought process because other people would definitely not agree if he made absurd demands. If she continues this way, she's going to be badly hurt in the future, Gustav analyzed, but he hadn't thought of a way to help change her mindset. This night he would be patrolling alone since one of his conditions to her was, she would only work with him on specific days of his choosing. 3 times a week, but he would pick the days himself. He had decided that he would only let her come with him on the days after he had defeated any mixed breed that appeared during the week. Chapter 75. 2 days had gone by again in a flash. Gustav was currently in the dojo, taking a break after training with Miss Amy. He and Miss Amy sat on the floor with their legs crossed as they discussed. Miss Amy, I've been wanting to ask, why do we have to wear yukatas when training? Gustav said with an intrigued look. You don't know about the history of this place? Miss Amy asked while turning to stare at him. Gustav shook his head in denial. Miss Amy decided to explain after seeing that Gustav had no idea about this place. This entire building is owned by a business group named Octavia. It's one of the most affluent business groups in the city, Miss Amy explained. The group is owned by a powerful family which originated from an ancient country known as Japan. In the olden days, Japan was one of the countries in an ancient continent named Asia that practiced martial arts. This yukata was a traditional outfit that originated from there. The family that owns this building also owns the dojo. They implemented their culture so it wouldn't be forgotten. Miss Amy concluded her explanation. Gustav now had a look of understanding. He already knew a thing or two about the ancient countries and part of their history, so Miss Amy's explanation made sense to him now. Miss Amy, that family, do you have a kind of connection to them? Gustav asked what had been bothering him for some time now. He had noticed the way Miss Amy was treated with respect around here. It made no sense that they would fear and respect her that much if she didn't have some kind of connection to the family that owned this building. Miss Amy squinted her eyes before replying. Who knows? Do I have a connection with them? Miss Amy shrugged and stood up. Let's continue, Miss Amy said. Gustav had a look of suspicion, but he decided not to pursue the matter. He stood up and continued his training with Miss Amy. Another day went by again. Today was a Thursday. For the past 3 days, Gustav hadn't visited the training hall to join his peers to spar. His classmates were still suspicious about him, but what he did the other day was starting to die down. They decided to focus on the upcoming exchange event. As for Angie, Gustav let her follow him on the night patrol for the last 2 days. The first night that she joined him, her father and mother came out of their apartment to plead with him to protect Angie in case of emergency. Angie felt very embarrassed, and she kept asking her parents to stop, but they refused. Gustav just nodded at them and left with Angie. He wasn't bothered since he already calculated that it wasn't time for a mixed breed to appear yet. He would only let Angie come with him on nights where he was sure that a mixed breed wouldn't show up anyways. He had asked Miss Amy about this weird phenomenon of mixed breeds crossing the border. She also couldn't understand why or how that was happening, but she promised Gustav that she would look into it when she had the time. For now, Gustav would still have to keep protecting the neighborhood, and he didn't mind since it was also bringing in money for him. He had also been selling parts and organs of mixed breeds secretly, which to his surprise also brought in a good amount of money. Gustav found out some time ago that organs of mixed breeds were also used to make drugs. He also found out that some restaurants cooked some luxurious meals using some of their organs. In school today, Gustav patiently waited for the day to end. He had been planning something for the past few days. It was time to put some of those plans in motion. The latter part of the day for Class 3 was always spent within the training hall. They would train there till the day ended. Trying. The sound of the closing bell reverberated across the school. Finally, school activities came to an end for the day. Class 3 students started streaming out of the hall in groups. Chatter. 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 Friends moved together, chatting with one another in excitement as they walked out. 2 tall students, in particular, were walking together with each other. One had orange-colored hair while the other had black hair. Both of their hairs were the shoulder-length type, but they were quite tall. The one with the orange-colored hair was 6'2", while the other was 6 feet. "Charles, are we going there today?" the one with the black hair asked with a smile. "Hoo-hoo, you bet we are, Gordon. I've held myself back for a week now with all this intense training. I must relieve all this pent-up stress," Charles replied with a mischievous smile. "Hee hee, yes, we should relieve our pent-up stress," Gordon answered back with a smile. Suddenly his face froze up. "Speaking of relief, I must relieve my bowels. I need to head to the bathroom." Gordon's face squeezed up as he spoke. "Eck again?" Charles asked with a slightly frustrated look. "I won't take long, please just wait," Gordon said and turned around to head for the bathroom inside the hall. "TCH, I wonder what he ate." Charles had a slightly pissed-off look as he stared at Gordon, who was running towards the hall. Charles moved towards the side to wait for Gordon. 15 minutes later, Gordon was jogging towards Charles from the direction of the training hall. His face had a look of relief. He arrived before Charles and spoke. "Let's go, Charles," he said. You sure you're up for it today?" Charles asked with a slight tone of worry. "Haha, why not? I wouldn't give up having fun with those sexy sluts for the entire world," Gordon replied. "Besides, we have to release our pent-up stress from all the intense training we've been going through," Gordon added. All right, let's go then," Charles said and turned around. They moved towards the parking lot and arrived in front of a floating velvet-colored car. The car was similar in shape to a sports car like the old days Lamborghini and Bugatti. The differences were, it was floating above the ground, it had a whitish kind of flame oozing from underneath, it looked way neater and futuristic, it was thrice the size of those kinds of sports cars, lastly it was at least 10 times faster. There was already a driver waiting for them. He bowed to both of them politely before they entered. The driver got in and started the car. Zwunnen! The sound of the engine was so smooth and soothing, it sounded pleasant to the ears. Swee-hi! It zoomed off with speed into the distance. Chapter 76. The interior of the car was so good-looking that it could be compared to a jet's cockpit. A guard on all black sat beside the driver's seat. He wore black shades also and had dark red hair, while the driver looked like a typical pushover with his scrawny build and honest-looking eyes. "Yoren, take us to that place," Charles voiced out from the back seat. "As you wish, young master," the driver replied politely and pushed a button forward before grabbing hold of a small bar-like handle and pushing it forward. Swoon! The car turned left at an intersection and kept speeding forward. Its speed was so fast that it blurred through the roads streaking by several vehicles. In Plankton City there were hardly any roads that had speed limits, but there was still some kind of speeds that were over the limit. An example would be moving at over 1,000 miles per hour, which was exactly how fast the car was moving. The thing was, no one could complain when they saw what type of car it was. A new modeled Vimpolo from the new Vimpolo Marcus series. A type of car that only the biggest shots in the city could afford. Their car arrived in front of a 5-story building. This part of the city was one of the busiest. It was always bustling with activity. People moved to and fro across the area. A lot of males and females streaked into this building that they arrived at. Most of the females that were walking in were laced in revealing garments. Most of them wore skimpy skirts that almost revealed their thighs completely, while some wore tight-fitted short gowns that revealed a lot of their cleavages, giving passers-by a sight for sore eyes. A glowing sign was hung up on the building that said, "Maiden's Haven." This was a well-known business place in the city that the so-called righteous citizens would see as a sinful place. It was the combination of a pub, a club, and a first-class brothel. It was obvious that Charles and Gordon frequented this place to have fun. Charles and Gordon got down from the car. They had changed from their school uniforms into something more casual. Even with the casual wear, you could still tell that they had an influential background. The men standing at the entrance bowed to them as they walked into the building along with their guard who followed behind. Normally there was a queue to get in, but both of them got special treatment. Even the ladies on the line were whistling at them before they entered to get their attention. Immediately they got in. After passing through the corridor, loud music blasted into their eardrums. Dance to the beat, don't you wanna get stoned? Move to the rhythm, drop that ass bomb, flow with the bass, and get high on fun. *ck them little bitches right in the hole. Some dirty music was playing out, and strippers could be seen dancing on poles in front. The lights and the atmosphere gave off a party vibe. There were seats positioned at different corners and people sat on tables with drinks placed in front of them, while some people were on the dance floor. Mostly ladies wriggling their butts. "Young masters, welcome back." A beautiful female in short green and red gown approached them while greeting. She had long blue hair and pink bunny ears. "Will it be the usual room today?" she asked. "Of course. That's the best place to have big fun, don't you think, Gordon?" Charles tapped Gordon as he spoke. "Huh. Oh yes, that room would be better." Gordon, who was absent-minded earlier, answered hurriedly. "You're still having that stomach upset?" Charles asked after noticing his weird behavior. Yes," Gordon answered with a slightly pained look. "Tap. Don't worry, once we're having fun with those beauties it will pass." Charles tapped Gordon's shoulder while assuring him. Gordon nodded with a smile. "Madame Farrell, get that room ready for us, and hoo-hoo, we want fresh blood today," Charles whispered into her bunny ear. The lady nodded with a smile and walked away while both of them picked a place to hang around in the meantime. 1 hour later they were in the last room on the last floor. The room was luxurious with 2 large beds big enough to contain 15 people each. There were 7 beautiful females in revealing outfits serving drinks to Gordon and Charles. They danced and moved across the place seductively, swaying their hips towards Gordon and Charles. Laughter filled the room as they drank to their heart content and touched the bodies of the females in a dirty manner. Both of them had 1 female each sitting on their lap. Charles' right hand was currently inside the bra of the one on his laps. He blatantly fondled her breasts from underneath the bra while talking to Gordon. The lady was moaning loudly into his ears and he kept laughing with excitement when he saw her expression. "Gordon, it's about time we ravished the beauties here, hoo-hoo-hoo," Charles said with a lewd smile hung on his face. Gordon smiled back, but just as he wanted to reply his face twisted in pain. "Ugh!" He threw the girl on his lap off him as he held on to his gut. Charles frowned. "Not again," he voiced with a disappointed look. Gordon stood up while holding his gut in pain. "Get out! All of you!" he shouted. The females were wondering what was happening. "I said get out!" he shouted again with his face squeezing in pain. The females scampered out of the room after hearing him shout for the second time. "Hey, you didn't have to chase them out, you could have just gone to do your thing in the bathroom," Charles said with a look of annoyance. Gordon kept holding his tummy while squatting slightly. "Help me, Charles," Gordon said with a pained voice. "What the hell did you eat?" Charles voiced out in dissatisfaction. "I eat our regulars, so I do nt know. Event chi pillales did nt warke," Gordon said with a pained expression. All right," Charles replied and went to assist Gordon up. "Help me to the bathroom," Gordon added. Charles placed Gordon's hand on his shoulder and helped him to the bathroom within the room. Immediately they entered the bathroom, Gordon smirked and withdrew his arm from Charles' shoulder with force. Before Charles could react to that, Gordon suddenly straightened himself up and reached out to grab Charles' face. He lifted Charles off the ground with one arm and dashed towards the wall ahead. Swoosh! Immediately he arrived before the wall, which had a mirror placed on it. He slammed Charles' head into it. Bang! The mirror cracked and pieces were sent flying in all directions. Blood trickled from the point of impact, across the surface of the mirror, towards the wall, and down to the floor. Chapter 77. Charles was in extreme pain and confusion as his head was pinned to the broken mirror on the wall. Gordon pulled him away from the wall and lifted him before slamming his head onto the toilet seat. Bang! The seat broke into several small pieces and water squirted out of the hole. Gordon picked Charles up again and lifted him before slamming his knee into his jaw. Splurt! His upper and lower teeth were forcefully gnashed against one another, causing pieces of teeth to fly out of his mouth along with blood. He felt his skull vibrate due to the intense force from the kick. Charles hadn't even been given the chance to react to any of the attacks. They were all too sudden and fast for him to try and counter. He couldn't even understand what was happening. The runny stomach, the look of pain, where was all that now? Another thought that came to his mind was, when did Gordon become strong enough to beat him in such a manner that he wouldn't be able to fight back? I need to activate my bloodline. This was the only way Charles felt he could escape from these chains of attacks. Bang! He slammed into the wall on the other side. Gordon dashed forward and threw out his fist towards Charles' chest. Just as his fist was close to making contact with Charles' chest, red electric snakes suddenly started appearing around Charles. These red electric snakes swam around his body. Gordon's fist was stopped several centimeters from touching Charles by a strange and invisible force. His fist couldn't move any closer. "What'are Gordon? I'll kill you!" Charles shouted out with a look of anguish on his blood-soaked face. He proceeded to throw out a fist coated with red electricity. Even with his injuries, he was still as quick as ever, but to his surprise, Gordon swerved and dodged his fist with ease. "This time is not gonna be like the last time," Gordon voiced out as he threw out his palm towards Charles' chest. Charles wasn't even given the chance to process Gordon's statement before the palm tore through the invisible force protecting him and slammed into his chest with force. Bang! Krryycchh. The sound of bones breaking could be heard as Charles' chest caved in and his back slammed into the wall more. Charles' eyes widened in shock and confusion as he spat out a mouthful of blood. That wasn't the end of it. Bam! 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 One after the other, Gordon's palms kept slamming into Gordon's chest. He interchanged it between left and right repeatedly, and due to the speed, Charles' body remained pinned to the wall as he couldn't do anything but watch the attacks rain down brutally upon his body. Bam! The final palm strike caused his ribcage to collapse entirely as blood jetted out of his nose, eyes, and mouth. "Why?" He managed to mutter this question before his eyes closed up and he passed out. Plop! His body fell to the floor limply. "For revenge, and also, because I want your bloodline." Since Charles had passed out, he was unable to see the evil smirk on Gordon's face as well as his reply to him. Gordon turned around and walked towards the door. Click! He locked it and walked back towards the body of Charles. He slowly squatted in front of him and placed his hand on Charles' neck. "You will suffer the same fate as your friend. Didn't you both enjoy bullying and torturing me back then?" Gordon's voice had changed into that of another person. This voice sounded smooth and light, masculine voice. Neither thick nor thin, more like soothing. Gordon's fingernails extended in length and pierced into Charles' neck, causing blood to drip towards the floor again. Hours ago, when school ended for the day, Gordon and Charles left the training hall together, but Gordon had a running stomach, so he asked Charles to wait while he went to use the toilet in the training hall. Gordon ran across the hall corridor with a sweat-filled face until he finally got to the bathroom located at the end. What he didn't notice was, there was a sign that said the bathroom was being cleaned up. He didn't notice this due to the way he was feeling extremely pressed. He entered the male's bathroom and walked towards one of the cubicles ahead. He also didn't notice that immediately he entered through the bathroom's door, a shadow streaked through the entrance before the door closed up. He arrived in front of the cubicle unbeknownst to him that there was someone following behind him. This person's footsteps were silent, so he didn't notice. Just as he pushed the door open, a hand grabbed onto him and pulled him backward. "Ah!" He moaned out in discomfort, but his voice was cut off by the palm that forcefully covered his mouth. He grabbed the hand and tried removing it from his mouth, but it would seem the assailant was way stronger than he was. The palm pressed more against his mouth as he felt an arm wrapping around his neck. GHRHHH! The arm tightened strongly around his neck, forcefully depriving him of oxygen. He kicked and clawed intensely in pain. He even tried using his elbows to hit the person in the guts, but it was like the person couldn't feel any pain. WHOISTHs? HOAR. ETHUISOSTRON. Gee, no matter how much he hit the person behind him, they didn't stop choking him. Tears were already spilling from his eyes as he felt his throat being crushed. He tried activating his bloodline ability, but he couldn't focus with his brain short-circuiting due to lack of oxygen. After a few more seconds, his eyes rolled to the back and he passed out. The person who was holding onto him kept squeezing for a few more seconds before letting go of him. Plop! Gordon's body fell to the floor without any signs of movement. Not much of a hassle to defeat the likes of you. A thin masculine voice was heard after the body fell to the floor. Chapter 78. Not much of a hassle to defeat the likes of you. A thin masculine voice was heard after the body fell to the floor. It was a man in black pants, a red t-shirt and a blue jacket. The man had an oblong-shaped face with long brown hair reaching his back. He stared at the body below as his fingernails extended to 3 inches in length. He squatted before the body of Gordon and grabbed onto his neck before lifting his head slightly off the ground. Let's get started then. The man had a huge grin on his face as his fingernails dug into Gordon's neck. Requirement for bloodline acquisition has been met. Analyzing host compatibility with energy transmutation bloodline 0% per 100%. Analysis complete. 27%/100%. Host compatibility with energy transmutation bloodline is 27%. Host compatibility with this bloodline is lower than average. Does host still desire to acquire this bloodline? Yes/no. This is a first, the man muttered inwardly. This man was Gustav. He had changed his appearance into that of a teacher in the school, which was why he was looking this way. What happens if I acquire this bloodline the way it is? Gustav wondered as he stared at the notifications. Acquiring a bloodline that is lower than 50% compatibility rate ends up being less than F grade after successful extraction. Gustav stared at the new notification that popped up with a look of understanding. I'm guessing this is why the bloodline grades decrease when I acquire them. If the compatibility is 100%, I should be able to extract it successfully into my body without it decreasing in grade, Gustav analyzed. He was so amazed by this revelation that the system just replied to him after a few seconds had gone by. Wait. You answered me? Gustav voiced out with a look of surprise. He noticed the message that popped up earlier disappear and get replaced with that, which meant speechlessness. It's been 3 months already, Gustav added with a contemplative look after remembering that the system didn't communicate with him for that long. What does the host expect? A good morning and night greeting every day? It was Gustav's turn to be speechless. Host should return to his activities after all. Your hands are full at the moment. These words appeared after that for a few seconds, then disappeared. Hey, what exactly are you? Gustav questioned. There was no reply this time. Hey! No reply again. Gustav called out several more times, but the system didn't reply to his call. Gustav knew it would be foolish to keep calling out to it, so he decided to continue what he was doing previously. It doesn't matter if the compatibility is low, so long as I can extract it. I will have another bloodline added to my collection, which would give me more options when making use of recreation. This was Gustav's thought process as he decided to accept the bloodline. Yes, Gustav stated. Host has decided to acquire this bloodline. Bloodline extraction will now begin. Bright glowing crimson-colored veins appeared on the neck of Gordon, who was laying on the ground. The veins extended deep down his neck, down his chest area, and kept going inwards. The bright glowing crimson veins transported that same color of blood upwards, towards Gustav's fingertips that were dug into his neck. The crimson glowing blood started flowing into Gustav's fingernails towards his wrists, straight upwards. His veins also glowed up with the same color. Bloodline extraction process, 50%/100%. Gustav had thought it would take longer to acquire the bloodline, but to his surprise, it took a shorter time than he expected. Congratulations! Host has acquired energy transmutation bloodline. In 5 more minutes, he saw the notification appear in his line of sight. Gustav withdrew his fingernails from the neck of Gordon, which was dripping blood. He waved his hand, causing the blood on his fingernails to splatter across the floor. His fingernails retracted, going back to their previous length, as he brought out a healing medical pill from his storage device and placed it in Gordon's mouth. You don't get to die on me yet. You must also go through the humiliation of being called trash, Gustav voiced with a smirk as he brought out a rope and some other items. He tied Gordon up and also gagged him before placing him beside the wall. Now that he has lost his bloodline, he won't be able to escape from here until someone sees him, but by then it will be too late, and it'll be done with Charles, Gustav said internally as his body slowly transformed into that of Gordon's. Hair color, eyes size, skin tone, height, hair length, everything about Gordon's looks were perfectly copied. Gustav pulled off his clothes and changed into Gordon's school uniform. Since Gordon was taller and bigger than he was, wearing his regular school uniform wasn't an option. After Gustav was done, he walked out of the bathroom and placed the cleaning sign properly in front of the door. Those past events led to this moment where Gustav was about to take Charles' bloodline. From when Charles brought him to the bathroom, he already activated Dash and used his speed to throw Charles out of balance. He used Palm Strike repeatedly earlier to break through the gravitational force surrounding Charles' body upon activating his bloodline. Charles' downfall was already certain from when he was fooled by Gordon's appearance, which was actually Gustav. Gustav had taken him by surprise from the first attack, dealt a lot of damage. This wasn't like the training session in school, so he wasn't going to hold back when fighting Charles this time. Charles was pretty much stronger than the rest of the Zulu-ranked mixed-bloods he had fought until now, but he still fell short of Gustav's prowess when he used his full strength. Gustav was still squatting at this moment. His nails still dug into Charles' neck. Requirement for bloodline acquisition has been met. Analyzing host compatibility with gravitational charge bloodline 0% per 100%. Analysis complete, 99. 9%/100%. Host compatibility with gravitational charge bloodline is 99. 9%. Does host desire to acquire this bloodline? Yes/no. Gustav stared at the notification with a look of amazement. Chapter 79. Does this mean I might be able to extract this bloodline without it being reduced in grade? Gustav wondered. He felt this was probably going to be the case and was eager to confirm it. Yes, he muttered with an intrigued look. Host has decided to acquire this bloodline. Bloodline extraction will now begin. Gustav saw the bar start to move after the notification appeared. He waited for about 5 minutes before notifications started popping up in his line of sight. Congratulations! Host has acquired gravitational charge bloodline. Monthly quest. Acquire a C-grade bloodline has been completed. Rewards. All stats +2. New attribute has been unlocked. Defense. 200,000 EXP. Host has leveled up. Host has leveled up. Host has leveled up. Notifications rang out repeatedly in his head. Originally he would be feeling headache from hearing the sound of numerous notifications, but right now it was like music to his ears. He stared at the notifications and smirked. Now those are what I call rewards, Gustav voiced out in excitement. He brought out 2 pills from his pocket and placed them in Charles' mouth before tying him up and gagging him like Gordon. After Gustav was done, he looked around the bathroom and noticed it was in a messy state. He would have choked Charles like he did with Gordon, but it would only prolong the fight. If Charles were to activate his bloodline while Gustav was making contact with him, Gustav would get numb temporarily. He already suspected that even with all the squeezing or whatever he decided to try, Charles would still be able to activate his bloodline regardless, so he decided to go with a heavy beating. Gustav brought out a small black bottle and opened it. He moved around the scene and poured out the content in different spots. A bluish powdery substance poured out and spread across the surroundings. There was no difference between the state of the room earlier and now. Only Gustav knew the purpose of the powder, since it didn't change anything in the atmosphere. After doing that, Gustav washed his hands at the faucet and put his looks in order before leaving the bathroom. He walked out of the room and arrived at the corridor that led to the stairs. His expression right now was that of a haughty young master. Exactly how Gordon acted. While walking across the corridor, the guard that followed them here was coming from the opposite direction. He saw Gustav coming from the other side and bowed slightly. Gustav stared at him with disgust before speaking. "Don't disturb Charles, he's busy right now, young master. I can't do that, it's already late, his father will be expecting him," the guard answered. "All right then, go. I wonder how Charles will deal with you after you disturb his pleasure time," Gustav said and kept walking forward. The guard's face paled as he heard that. "Young master, what about you? Why are you not joining him?" The guard turned around and asked. "Because I'm done, you big oaf. I'm going to wait in the car, you better don't disturb him until he's done," Gustav said without turning around. He walked towards the stairways ahead and walked down the stairs. The guard kept staring in the direction where Gustav headed for a few seconds before gulping down spit and walking towards the room where everything went down. He got to the front of the door and reached out for the button that controlled the opening and shutting of the door. He stopped himself when his finger was only a few centimeters from touching the button. "Let me wait for a few more minutes," he said and moved to the side of the entrance to stand. Gustav, who had already gotten to the elevator that led down, sighed in relief. A drop of sweat had already appeared on his forehead. "That was an expert that is on the same level with the person who abducted me." Gustav cleaned the drop of sweat on his head as the elevator descended. Gustav wondered where Gordon and Charles got the guts to speak to him anyhow they willed. The way he spoke to the guard earlier was similar to Gordon's method of speaking. Disrespect, haughtiness, and lack of regard. Does this mean background matters more than power, or does power matter more? Gustav couldn't see someone as powerful as Miss Amy bowing to some group of brats as they trash-talked her. He knew the guard wasn't as powerful, but even with that, he didn't expect that someone at that level of strength would just choose to be a lackey. He couldn't wrap his head around it no matter how much he tried. He placed that behind him as the elevator reached the ground floor. The ground floor was always crowded due to it being accessible to everyone regardless of their status. Immediately Gustav walked amidst the crowd of people. He transformed into a random person and left through the exit. An hour later Gustav was in his bedroom reminiscing about today's event. It went just as planned, but it could have gone really bad had that guard decided to enter the room. "I wonder if they'll attend school after all this." "Probably not, those bastards can't take the shame after all, but it doesn't change the fact that they'll be seen as trash as from now on," Gustav muttered with a look of gratification. He felt shape-shifting was really convenient for getting a lot of sneaky deeds done. His mind went back to how he started planning all this last week. Last week he asked Boss Danzo about a recipe he could add to any meal that would cause severe diarrhea. Originally this illness was something that could be fixed by downing a single healing pill, but Gustav asked Boss Danzo for specific recipes that would cause the illness to remain even after downing a bottle of healing pills. Boss Danzo asked what he needed that for, but Gustav answered that it was only for research. Boss Danzo gave him some concoctions that could be mixed to achieve that effect. After getting how to mix the concoctions, Gustav used them to prepare an odorless and tasteless oil. This morning he used that oil to cook a separate meal. Gustav had been able to access the second floor of the high school cafeteria since he started training with Miss Amy. There were times he would assist the chefs in serving food to the mixed bloods. He decided to do that again today and made use of the opportunity to serve Gordon that special food. Chapter 80. Gustav had been studying both of them for the past week. He knew Gordon's feeding timetable, so he was sure about the meal he was gonna get today. Of course, when Gordon and Charles came to buy their lunch together, they didn't forget to throw snide remarks at Gustav when they saw him selling food at the counter. Gustav knew that they would come to his side of the counter once they saw him, which was one of the reasons why he decided to help the chef serve food today. This was what led to Gordon getting the special meal. Since then he had been having a runny stomach and had to visit the bathroom countless times. Gustav, who everyone thought would never attend the sparring sessions again, was always close by whenever it was going on. He had been watching them since after break. His plan paid off when Gordon ran to the toilet after the day ended. That was where his plan truly kicked off. The other time when he sparred with Charles and Gordon, he was inspecting their bloodline abilities on a closer scale. Charles especially, since Gustav wanted to find out if he could break through the gravity barrier that always surrounded him after he activated his bloodline. From when Gustav made contact with the gravity field that always surrounded Charles, he calculated the amount of force that would be needed to break through it, and he realized that palm strike skill could achieve that. Gustav was glad that everything worked out as planned, and he had already put several things in place to make sure these deeds were not traced back to him. After contemplating about a few more things, Gustav opened the system interface to check his stats. Host attributes: name, Gustav level, 8 class, EXP, 69, 500/150 000 HP, 1250/1250 energy, 900/1000, attributes: strength, 37 perception, 37 mental fortitude, 37 agility, 37 speed, 52 bravery, 37 intelligence, 37 charm, 37 defense, 5 attributes points, 19. Gustav stared at the new stat with a contemplative look. Defense? I'm guessing it might have to do with strengthening my body or something, he analyzed. It's too bad I spent most of my attributes points on the race with NG. Gustav sighed in dissatisfaction. Add 5 points to defense, Gustav commanded. Plus 5 points have been added to defense. He only had 19 attributes points to spare at this moment. He always liked to save some in case of emergency, so he didn't add more to defense after this. He decided that he would use the daily stats to increase defense until it up to par with the rest. I wonder if my body is steadier now. Unlike the other stats, he could hardly feel any difference when he increased his defense stats. He decided he would try it out later. It was evening already, so it was time for his patrols. He suspected that a mixed breed would show up today, so he decided for Angie to skip today's patrols so he would do it alone. The next day Gustav woke up by his usual time and went to school. Last night, just as he expected, a mixed breed showed up, and it was a level 1 this time. It didn't take Gustav longer than a few minutes to kill it and add it to beast transformation. This happened to be a mutated ape mixed breed. It looked like a monkey with white furs, but it was as big as a gorilla. Its features were in its ability to corrode any object it touched. Gustav felt it wasn't needed since he already had atomic disintegration, but on second thought he decided to extract it. He decided that the next mixed breed he considered useless would be sold to a lab without any extraction being performed on it. From the information he gathered earlier, mixed breed corpses would sell for good prices in laboratories, but he never for once tried to do that. If the laboratory researches the corpses and found out that their bloodline was missing, it would arouse suspicions. Now that he could transform into anyone he willed, he could use a different character and form to do business with laboratories. Not a lot of facilities around this part of the city had see-through technology security protocols that could scan a person's internals, which could potentially put shape-shifting to shame. This was why Gustav wasn't worried about them noticing that he wasn't in his original form. Gustav walked to school after getting to the usual stopping point for him and Angie. School cafeteria. During the break period, Gustav was sitting on the second floor taking his lunch. He always stays behind, so no one usually noticed that was there most of the time. Sometimes some of them would see him, and not even recognize him. Chatter. 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 The hall was noisier than usual today, with discussions coming from different angles. Just as Gustav expected, the news about what happened to Gordon and Charles had circulated. Dash. Hey, did you hear? Gordon and Charles lost their bloodlines? Dash. What? How did that happen? Dash. No one knows, but Charles said Gordon was responsible for the incident while Gordon said it was an unknown man. Dash. That doesn't make any sense. It can't be Gordon if he also lost his bloodline. Dash. Have you heard that something similar happened 2 months ago to Ben? Dash. What? Ben also lost his bloodline? Dash. Yes, the person said to be responsible was a terrorist mixed blood who was also accused of being the one responsible for putting Hung Zhou in his current state. Dash. Ovalid is the only terrorist suspected in the meantime, but he never had any means of taking any mixed blood's bloodline before, so no one knows if it's all just a cover-up so the government can have someone to blame. Dash. Damn though, what is really happening? Is the city not safe anymore? Dash. More like what's happening in this school, since such unfortunate events has only happened to students that attend this school. Gustav listened from the side with a barely noticeable smile on his face. There's more to come. Chapter 81. There's more to come, but I should be cautious and keep it on the low for now. Gustav's thought process was like this because, before did this, no one was wary and everyone practically let their guards down. Now that it had become a hot topic, everyone was cautious now. No one wanted to be the next Gordon or Charles, so everyone was watching their backs. Gustav could tell that it wasn't going to be easy when next he decided to steal a student's bloodline now that things had developed to this state. He wasn't too bothered though, because aside from Hung Zhou, Ben, Paul, Charles, and Gordon, there were only about 2 persons left that bullied him. Hung Zhou was top of the list while the rest of these 2 left were at the bottom. The rest of his classmates only talked down on him and called him trash, so he wasn't really planning anything for them, but he had decided to face slap a lot of them in the MBO entrance test. Either way, he decided not to try anything intense like what he did the day before. Gustav finished his meal later and left the hall after exchanging greetings with some of the chefs. The latter half of the day was spent training Class 3 students again. The instructor was a little bit bothered about Gordon and Charles' situation, but it didn't affect his plans overall since there were way more students that were better than both of them in Class 3. The students showed more of their prowess and potential so they could fill in the spot that Charles and Gordon occupied. Class 3 had over 100 students. Although everyone would be attending, everyone couldn't represent the school in duels. Charles happened to be picked as part of the dual team members while Gordon was picked as a substitute, which was why students were showing their prowess today. They wanted the 2 empty slots that were currently available. Also, those that planned to be picked as the captain of the team had to always show their prowess. It would still take some time before the instructor would pick a captain. The school practically ended noisily before everyone went to their houses. Another 3 days passed by and it was Monday again. His weekend with Angie was a pretty interesting one since he was helping her push her speed to the limit by giving her some tasks during the night observation. Angie was starting to wonder if mixed breeds were avoiding her presence. She was always so happy when no mixed breed showed up. Gustav realized that she didn't want the neighborhood and him to be in any form of danger, but she had no idea that he was purposely making her come out to patrol with him on days when he was sure there'll be no mixed breed appearing. Gustav headed for school once again with her and arrived at school several minutes later. He was inside the kitchen cooking some meals when Boss Danzo asked to speak with him. Both of them went to the corridor to exchange conversation. "Hey lad, how have you been doing lately?" Boss Danzo asked with a worried tone. "I'm fine, boss, why do you ask?" Gustav was a bit dumbfounded by the sudden question. I'm just concerned for your well-being is all," Boss Danzo replied. I understand, boss, so why did you want to see me?" Gustav asked with an intrigued look. "I just want to give you a piece of advice, it's up to you to listen." Boss Danzo spoke. "I know you've been wronged by lots of people, your family, your peers, and practically the society, but son, I've noticed you're getting more colder and colder by the day. I don't want you to become like the people you hate." Boss Danzo added. "Now I'm not telling you to like them or forgive them, I'm just saying don't be like them, be better. If you plan to take revenge on them in the future or anything, don't involve the innocent," Boss Danzo stated. Gustav nodded with a look of understanding. "Of course, Boss Danzo, I won't become like those rotten people. I have my own way of doing things is all," Gustav replied. "Good, very good." Gustav, do you know who a true man is? Boss Danzo asked. Gustav had an intrigued look on his face after hearing that question. He didn't want to end up saying something dumb, so he asked, "Who is a true man?" A true man is one with principles that forbid him from turning a blind eye to someone being inflicted with the pain he has gone through, Boss Danzo stated. Gustav had a contemplative look on his face after hearing that explanation. Gustav, are you a true man? Do you have such principles or a similar principle? Boss Danzo asked with a profound gaze. Gustav stood there speechless. He didn't know how to reply. Now mind you, my boy, I'm not asking you to become a hero. Becoming a hero in this vast world is not only useless, but will also bring about your death. I'm only telling you not to turn a blind eye to something you know you can truly change. If you see a person is being inflicted with the same pain you went through and you have the ability to put an end to it, don't turn a blind eye. You don't have to be a hero, but being numb to wicked deeds and the likes of those who are a nuisance to the community makes you no different from the people you hate. Boss Danzo patted Gustav's shoulder after speaking and turned around to leave. As Boss Danzo walked 2 steps forward, Gustav spoke, causing him to pause. Boss Danzo, why should I care about being a monster when no one gives a damn about turning me into one? Why won't I turn my back on the world when it turned its back on me? Why would I bother trying to save people that I believe, if were in my shoes today, wouldn't bother trying to save me when I'm in trouble? Why would a selfish world such as this deserve even an iota of my mercy? Gustav asked in successions while staring at the floor. In his eyes, only sorrow could be seen. Chapter 82. This topic seemed to have opened a lot of scars for him. Good questions, my boy. The answer is something that I'm sure you know deep down but don't want to admit it, Boss Danzo stated while turning around to face Gustav again. Which is? Gustav asked. There are people who are actually decent in this world, Boss Danzo replied. And those kinds of people are the type that deserves your mercy since they've never hurt anyone. Boss Danzo turned around once again and went, and leaving Gustav to wallow in his thoughts. Even when the day ended, Gustav couldn't stop thinking about what Boss Danzo said. Maybe he was truly turning a blind eye as he got more powerful. If Boss Danzo had told him to become a hero outright, he would have turned him down instantly, but the way he spoke made a lot of sense to Gustav. I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. I know for a fact that I haven't harmed anyone who didn't deserve it. Gustav stopped the internal battle going on within his mind with this. Everyone left for home after school came to an end for the day. Gustav also left for home since today was a free day for him. Miss Amy wouldn't be training him today. Although he could still go to the dojo and do self-training, only one thought was in his mind right now, and that was to try out recreation. The only problem was he hadn't decided on the bloodlines he would combine. Beast transformation was still a no, along with atomic manipulation. He didn't know if he would be able to use them separately after the transformation. Same with his genetic transformation bloodline. The two he could use in performing the experiment were the ones he extracted from Gordon and Charles. The reason Gustav was feeling reluctant about he liked Charles' bloodline and what it could do. He didn't want to use recreation on it, but there was no other bloodline he could use, so he had to come to terms with it. When he thought about it more, he realized that this was a better option since he wouldn't be able to use the abilities in public places. If he did, they would be recognized, but with recreation, they could turn out to be something different when mixed, and no one would be able to recognize the abilities. Gustav got home later and sat on his bed to test it out. Now that I think about it, will recreation work without the need for requirements like the bloodline acquisition? Gustav wondered. But after thinking about it for a while, he decided trying it out would be the best way to know. Activate recreation, Gustav said internally. Recreation has been activated. Gustav felt hot on the inside all of a sudden. Wow, what's that? He wondered. He could feel the bloodlines around the channel points bubbling with intensity. Which bloodlines does host wish to combine? The system asked. Combine gravitational charge and energy transmutation bloodline, Gustav commanded internally. Host has decided to combine gravitational charge and energy transmutation bloodline, gravitational charge plus energy transmutation, calculating compatibility rate, 0%, calculating compatibility rate, 17%, calculating compatibility rate, 37%. Gustav watched as the system calculated the compatibility rate. In a few seconds it was done. Compatibility of combination is 58%. Does host still wish to combine both bloodlines? Yes/no. Gustav was about to say yes when a warning notification popped up. Warning! Combining these bloodlines might create a bloodline that will be dangerous to others as well as the host. Gustav read the warning notification with a look of amazement. This can only mean two things. First, the bloodline created from the combination of both bloodlines will be powerful. Second, it will be so powerful and hard to control that I may harm others and myself with it if I'm not able to control it, Gustav analyzed. Surprisingly, he looked quite excited instead of looking disturbed. Now I'm looking forward to this even more, Gustav said inwardly before giving the system his answer. Yes, combine the bloodlines. Combining energy transmutation and gravity charge, Gustav suddenly felt a cool and soothing feeling welling up from within. Recalibrating bloodlines to their initial genetic form, mixing endoplasm antimycogen cellulose. Different notifications begin to pop up in his line of sight as Gustav felt his body undergo different kinds of internal changes. Combination process will begin. Combination procedure 0.01%/100%. Gustav watched as the percentage moved up slowly. Combination procedure 0.19%/100%. Even after 2 hours, it was still at 0.19. Gustav's mouth was slightly opened in frustration. At this stage, it will take at least 2 days, Gustav sighed internally. He thought it would be fast like bloodline acquisition, but he was wrong. Recreation didn't have requirements like bloodline acquisition, but the process was really slow. It was time for Gustav to go do his usual night routine. He didn't know if his movement would affect the combination, but he had to move or hell cancel the combination entirely. Gustav stood up and went to change his clothes. The soothing feeling he was getting from the combination came occasionally, but he was able to ignore it and move. The soothing feeling always made him want to lie down and relish the enjoyment coming from within, but at the moment, he had to block the feeling from affecting his movement. Gustav went out for neighborhood inspection after a while with Angie. He arrived back at midnight, and just as expected, no mixed breed showed today. The only reason why Gustav was feeling disappointed was because of the notification that was still displayed in his line of sight. Combination procedure 12.7%/100%. This is gonna take a while, Gustav said internally. This meant he would have to go to school the next day, this way. Gustav went to school the next day with the combination still in process. Sometimes the soothing feeling would be so good that Gustav would have the urge to moan, but he would hold it in. If he suddenly started moaning in classes, people would think he had gone from being trashed to being possessed. He wasn't really bothered by his classmates' thoughts about him right now, but he would prefer not to add more to the weird list. Chapter 83. Gustav checked the percentage of the combination procedure almost every hour in school. It was still moving as slow as ever. Even after the entire day had passed, the procedure was not still completed. While he was training with Miss Amy, she noticed his weird state and asked if all was well. Of course, Gustav replied that everything was all right. Sometimes he would get a soothing feeling that caused his actions to delay. Even though it was only for a split second, Miss Amy would notice it because Gustav hardly paused for a millisecond during a battle. His brain was always in full mode, thinking and plotting. Before his first attack has landed, he was already preparing for the second and third, but this time it wasn't quite so. He already decided that the next time he was going to try out recreation, he would lock himself indoors until it was done combining the two bloodlines. Miss Amy could see Gustav staring into thin air sometimes, which gave her a weird feeling, but since he said he was okay, she decided not to pursue it. After their training ended for the day, Gustav went home immediately. He didn't want to stick around to embarrass himself by mistake or something. He got home and sat on his bed. He distributed today's points from completing daily tasks first. He placed everything in defense since he wanted to raise it as high as the rest. Add 5 points to defense. Plus 5 points has been added to defense. Gustav was finally starting to sense a little bit of change in his body after defense reached 15 points. He would have loved to test it out, but at the moment there was nothing he could use to test out his defense, and he was more worried about recreation right now. He decided to check the progress again. Combination procedure, 57, 89%/100%. Gustav lied on his bed in frustration after seeing the progress. He knew it would still take till the end of the next day before it would be done. Gustav was thinking about staying indoors the next day, but he decided not to because of his training with Miss Amy. He only trained with her 3 days of the week now, so he didn't want to miss any days. Gustav. The night quickly passed once again, and the next day came. Gustav was feeling excited when he woke up because he was sure the combination would be finished today. He checked the progress once again. Combination procedure, 78, 57%/100%. He got prepared to leave home for school. After Gustav got to school, he started feeling a kind of hotness from within. Gustav hissed in pain as he felt his blood bubbling again. Combination procedure, 80%/100%. He noticed it was at 80%, which meant it was closer to completion. He guessed that this was the reason for the burning feeling within. After a while, the hot feeling was replaced by the refreshing feeling again. Gustav was already starting to regret coming to school because when the feeling of hotness came, he was forced to stop his steps. Also, he noticed something around his pants area that he never thought would be possible for him to develop right now. He walked to the kitchen and asked Boss Danzo for a break today. This came as a surprise to Boss Danzo, and he asked if Gustav was alright. Gustav only told him he needed to rest, and Boss Danzo gave his consent. Gustav went to class and sat there alone. It was still very early in the morning, so there was not a single student to be seen in the class. Gustav just sat there trying to calm his urges till students began to stream into the class. The first 2 who arrived were surprised to see him in class by that time. Unlike before, where they might have uttered snide remarks, they ignored him and went to their seats. When the class became filled, discussions of the upcoming exchange event could be heard again. Gustav just blocked his mind from the class and focused on calming himself. Throughout the day, he was absent-minded. He later went to the dojo to train with Miss Amy after the day had ended. Pa! 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 Miss Amy was currently using a long staff-like weapon to spar with Gustav. Gustav was holding onto a red weapon that was a mixture of a gun and a broadsword. He rotated 3 times, slamming the sharp part of the weapon onto the staff on Miss Amy's hand. Miss Amy used the lower part of the staff to slap Gustav's weapon towards the side before rotating the staff and slamming the tip on his head twice. Bang! Bam! Gustav fell to the floor after taking that hit. He laid down like a log of wood and breathed in and out profusely. He stayed in that position for a while. What's wrong with you lately? Miss Amy asked with a look of worry. I'm fine, Gustav said and got back up. Let's get back to. Before Gustav completed his statement, he suddenly felt hotness welling up underneath his gut. Gustav exclaimed with a look of discomfort. Are you all right? Miss Amy asked as she noticed sweat forming on Gustav's face. I'm fine, Gustav muttered again as he felt the hotness being subdued and being replaced with a feeling of intense coolness. He sighed in relief and stared at Miss Amy. I'm fine, he said once again, only for him to notice that Miss Amy's eyes weren't on him. Instead, her eyes were focused on a certain part of his body. Oh, I see why you've been spacing out lately. Going through puberty, yeah. Miss Amy voiced out with a smirk, while staring at Gustav's lower half. Gustav followed her line of sight down, and stared at himself. His eyes widened as he saw the huge bulge protruding in between his upper thighs. The bulge was so huge that the yukata he was putting on couldn't hide its liveliness. Gustav quickly turned around and with a look of embarrassment, and used his hands to cover his privates. It seems to have grown bigger since the last time I saw it. So much life and vigor. I wonder if you've been thinking of doing that with a girl lately. Anyways, congratulations, you've gone from having a thumb to a. Before Miss Amy could complete her statement, Gustav interrupted her. Miss Amy, why in the hell are you staring? Gustav voiced out in dissatisfaction. You pointed it at me like a gun. Of course, I'll stare at it, Miss Amy said with a burst of playful laughter. You're tuning into the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.